Hi, everyone. Welcome to Crime in Court. This is the 1996 Menendez brothers trial, California versus Erik and Lyle Menendez, on trial for the homicides of their parents, Kitty and Jose. This is their retrial. So we streamed through and watched the first trial, which took place in 1993. This is now their second trial. And we unfortunately don't have video, so we are going to have to read through the transcript. And that's what we've been doing so far. We are on week 3. This is the state's case, part 13. We are going to be reading through Mary Mahar, or Mahar, I don't know. Mahar is what I'm going to say. And she is the woman who sold the brothers the Rolex watches. So let's get started. Please hit the like button if you don't mind. All right, so the people call Mary Mahar. Mary Ellen Mahar was called to the witness stand. She was sworn in. Oh, really quick before I get us started, I almost forgot. Just as a reminder, I posted this on X, but in case you aren't on X, the resentencing hearing that was scheduled for this month for March 20th and 21st has been rescheduled for April 18th and 19th, I believe are the dates. And also, so that's the rescheduling hearing. There is a June 13th, um, hearing in front of the parole board, which is huge because they were sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. So the fact that they're going in front of a parole board is amazing. And basically, Governor Newsom just circumvented all the BS garbage that Nathan Hochman did in his press conferences by allowing a risk assessment and now scheduling a parole board hearing. So those are some that's some good news on that end. So I just wanted to give you that info. Also, nope, April 11th is a hearing just for Nathan Hochman, who, as you know, he's opposing the resentencing. He has put in a formal withdrawal request of the resentencing request. He wants to withdraw the request, and it's not really up to him. And he has an opportunity to be heard in front of the judge on April 11th as to why it should be withdrawn. However, that was scheduled at the same time as the resentencing hearing, the 2-day hearing for the brothers on the 18th and 19th. So he may have an opportunity to be heard, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the judge is going to do what Nathan Hochman wants, because it's up to the judge ultimately. So we shall see what happens going from there. All right, let us get started. Ms. Maher is called to the stand. The court says, okay. Oh, wait, sorry. Mr. Levin is doing the questioning. Nope. Who's doing the questioning for the state? Ms. Nahara. Ms. Nahara is going to be doing the questioning for the state. Here. Okay, so Mr. Levin already objects. He says, Your Honor, there's an objection with respect to an exhibit the prosecution wishes to use that I've just seen. So that's where, okay. So it's about an exhibit. The court says, okay, and you have not seen it before? Mr. Levin says, I believe co-counsel has, but I didn't. Ms. Nahara says, I had shown it to them on a previous occasion. The court says, okay, can you start with this witness before getting to that exhibit, and we'll take a little time to deal with it. Ms. Nahara says, I could get started right now, but I can get started now, Your Honor, and we'll work our way to it. The court says, okay. Ms. Nahara says, okay, good enough. Mr. Levin says, Your Honor, I'll withdraw the objection. I'm sorry. The court says, okay. Now let's get to direct examination. All right, Ms. Nahara says, Ms. Mahar, back on August 24th, 1989, where did you work? At Slavics in Century City. And is this the Slavik's jewelry store at 10250 Santa Monica Boulevard in the city of Los Angeles? Yes, it is. And ma'am, on that day, that would be 4 days after the homicides of Jose and Kitty Menendez, did the defendants Lyle Menendez and Erik Menendez come into your store? Yes, they did. And when I refer to the defendants, Lyle and Erik Menendez, and the two individuals in court, are those the two individuals that came into your store? Yes, they did. And as you sit there, do you recall what time they came into your Slavik's jewelry store? In the morning, 10:30 or 11 a.m. And do you recall what it was that they wanted in your store? Objection with respect to they. One person says Mr. Levin, and the court sustains that. Ms. Nahara says, when both individuals walked into your store, what, if anything, do you recall starting with defendant Lyle Menendez at the far end? What did he do? I forgot at the beginning, I want to remind you guys, let me switch over here to show you. I did this slideshow of the different attorneys in this case so that you guys have a visual of what all the attorneys look like. Gil Garcetti is the DA. We never see him or hear from him, but I threw him in there. This is Carol Nahara, Ms. Nahara, that we're hearing from right now. She is currently an LA Superior Court judge. Mr. Khan is the other individual for the prosecution that we'll hear from time to time. Lyle's defense, we have a Michael Judge, but we have yet to hear from him too. So we mostly hear from Charles Gessler and Terry Towery. And then, of course, we have the lovely Ms. Abramson, who is returning from the first trial, and then she's the only lawyer that returns from the first trial. And here is Barry Levin, also for Erik's defense. So Leslie and Barry are for Erik. Erik's attorneys, Lyle's attorneys include Terry and Charles. So just a reminder that is available for you in the links below. I just wanted to remind you that that's there and give you guys a refresh for your memory, your visual memory. All right, so Ms. Nahara says, when both individuals walked into your store, what, if anything, do you recall starting with the defendant, Lyle Menendez, at the far end? What did he do? He asked to see Rolex watches. And the defendant, the defendant, Erik Menendez, what did he do, if anything? They were obviously shopping together. Mr. Levin says, objection, it's a conclusion, it's speculation, ask it to be stricken. The court says sustained, the answer is stricken. Ms. Nahara says, the defendant, Erik Menendez, where was he when the defendant, Lyle Menendez, asked to see the Rolexes? Very near. Was he standing next to him? Yes. And was he paying attention to what the defendant, Lyle Menendez, objection, calls for speculation what he was doing? The court says, as to that particular question, it does call for speculation. Ms. Nahara continues. The defendant, Erik Menendez, appeared to be paying attention to what the defendant, Lyle Menendez, was doing. Objection, speculation. It's still vague as to what you mean. Perhaps you can rephrase it. Ms. Nahara says, what was the defendant, Erik Menendez, doing exactly when the defendant, Lyle Menendez, asked to see the Rolexes? He was observing what his brother was asking. Mr. Levin says, objection, Your Honor, motion to strike, conclusion, speculation on the part of the witness. The court says, objection sustained, the answer is stricken. Ms. Nahara says, what did you observe of the defendants after the defendant, Lyle Menendez, asked to see the Rolexes? He asked about watches. His brother was with him. I showed him watches. When you say you showed him watches, who did you show watches to? Lyle. But I don't know how to put this across. They were together. Lyle was more actively asking questions about the watches. And what was the defendant, Erik Menendez, doing? Observing. Did he look at the watches? Yes. And did you bring out some Rolex watches for the defendant to look at? Yes, I did. And how many watches did you display or show? A few. I don't remember exactly, but we looked at more than one watch. Approximately, as you sit there, approximately how many do you think you may have shown them? 4 or 5. And when you took out these 4 or 5, how many different Rolex types do you have there? Objection, irrelevant, overruled. Many. It's a very extensive line. What was the reason why you took out these particular 4 or 5 to show them? Because they were models that they were interested in seeing. And how did you objection with respect to the term they? There's been no testimony that Erik Menendez was interested. That's coming from Mr. Levin. The court says, all right, the objection sustained, the answer is stricken with reference to the word he or they. Rather, they were interested. Ms. Nahara says, did someone there express an interest in seeing some of these models? Yes. Which one was that? That was Lyle. And when Lyle Menendez expressed the interest in seeing some of these Rolex watches, what was the defendant, Erik Menendez, doing? He was observing close by his brother, Lyle. Objection calls for conclusion on the part of the witness. Ask it to be stricken. Overruled, the answer will stand. Why? I mean, it's the same objection as before, but this time it will allow it. I don't know. Ms. Nahara continues. Now you took out these 4 or 5 models. What kind of models were they in terms of the different various types that you have? Were those on the high end, the low end, or the middle end? One was in the high end, the other two were very similar priced at the lower end. Now you said you may have shown them 4 or 5. These 4 or 5, are these all the same, or were they the kind of going through the spectrum of prices of Rolexes? Again, one was very higher retail value and the other and higher than any others. Hold on, let me re-say that again. Again, one was much higher retail value than any of the others. So when you took out these watches, what did you do with them? I showed them to Lyle. When you say showed them to Lyle, what do you mean? You open up a Rolex clasp and you hand it to the person in such a way that they can easily put it on their wrist and try it on. And did you do this? Yes. And did you hand it to the defendant, Lyle Menendez? Yes, to the best of my recollection, yes, I did. And what was the defendant, Erik Menendez, doing when you handed the defendant, Lyle Menendez, a watch? He was close by, observing his brother. How many times do you have to ask this question? I mean, it's the same damn question, just over and over and over again. It's just it irks me when an attorney just keeps asking the same question and they're not getting the answer that they want, and or it keeps getting objected to, and yet they keep trying, and it's frustrating. And did he ever try on a watch? He being the defendant, Erik Menendez? I cannot specifically remember now. I believe so, to the best of my recollection, he did. Mr. Levin says objection calls for an opinion that the witness has no personal knowledge. Ask it be stricken. The court says overruled. The answer will stand. Ms. Nahir continues. Now, how many watches were tried on that day in this transaction? I don't remember exactly. A few, could have been 2, could have been 6. And do you recall how many watches the defendant Lyle Menendez tried on that day? No, I don't. I cannot give you a specific number, but it could have been 2, could have been 4 or 5. I don't remember exactly. So do you recall if the defendant, Erik Menendez, tried on one watch? Objection assumes facts not in evidence. He tried on any. Assumes facts not evidence that he tried on any. Overruled, says the court. The witness says, to the best of my recollection, yes, he did. He tried on more than one watch. To the best of my recollection, yes. And what happened after you showed the defendants these various Rolex watches? They asked to look at another item. They ultimately decided to make a purchase. Mr. Levin says, objection with respect to the term they. The court sustains that and says the answer is stricken. You would think at this point she would not keep saying they, but she does. Ms. Nahar says, did one or both of the defendants ask to look at something other than the Rolex watches? Yes. And as you sit there, do you recall if it was one or both defendants who asked? I believed it was Lyle. And to the best of my recollection. This would be the defendant, Lyle Menendez? Yes. And what did he ask to look at besides the Rolex watch? Money clips. And once again, where was the defendant, Erik Menendez, with the defendant, Lyle Menendez, when the defendant, Lyle Menendez, asked to look at the money clips? Close by his brother, observing. And did the defendant, Erik Menendez, also look at money clips? To the best of my recollection, he participated by at least glancing at them. And what did you do when the defendant, Lyle, asked to look at the money clips? I showed them to him. And how many did you show him? Do you recall? I don't recall an exact number. Now, at some time after you showed the defendants the money clips, what happened then? They or Lyle decided to go through and make a purchase. And what do you recall he purchased? Specifically, 3 Rolex watches, 2 of which were in the location I was working at that day. The third one had to be picked up from a sister location, and either 2 or 3 money clips. Now, starting with, you said that the defendant Lyle Menendez purchased 3 Rolexes, is that correct? Yes. Ms. Nahara says, Your Honor, I have a photograph of what appears to be a Rolex watch. I'd like it marked. I believe it's 116. The court says, yes, that's 116. Ms. Nahara continues on, and in fact, Your Honor, I have several items I'd like to mark at this time. The court says, okay. She says, I have a second photo of what appears to be a stainless steel Rolex. I'd like that to be marked People's 117. And finally, I have a picture of what appears to be a Submariner Rolex. I'd like that to be marked as People's 118. The court says, okay. Ms. Nahara says, Your Honor, I also have what appears to be a blow-up of 3 receipts. It was previously marked in the last trial as 71. I'd like it to be marked 119. The court says 119. Thank you. Now, showing you what has just been marked, Mr. Gessler says, May I approach? Also, Your Honor. The court says, certainly. Ms. Nahara says, What has just been marked as 116 for identification? I'd like you to take a look at that and tell me what's depicted in that photograph. It's a Rolex, 18 karat, yellow gold, oyster, perpetual date. Did the defendant, Lyle Menendez, purchase a Rolex Presidential on August 24th, 1989? Yes, he did. And what was the president? Okay, so it's a presidential model? I don't know where they identified at what point it was a presidential model, but okay. And was the presidential model that he purchased the same presidential model as what you see before you? With one exception, the watch that was purchased did not have an emerald stone setting on the dial. And you anticipated my next question, which was there something different about this photograph? If you could just take the pointer and tell me why that photograph depiction is slightly different from the Rolex that you sold the defendant. The watch that was purchased did not have emeralds set at the hours. It did not have any of the stones on it of any kind. Now, with regards to the Rolex that was photographed before you, how is it substantially similar to the Rolex that you sold the defendant? FYI, I don't know if I said this earlier at the top. I know I said it at the end of the last stream, but Ms. Mary Mahar did not testify in trial 1, so this is all brand new information that we're learning. It might have come in other ways. The brothers testified to purchasing these watches and things, but this is the first time we're hearing her testimony. I totally forgot to tell you that. Sorry. All right, so now with regards to the Rolex that is photographed before you, how is it substantially similar to the Rolex that you sold the defendant? It's exact in terms of its metal content. It's solid 18 karat gold. The case is 18 karat gold, as well as the bracelet, the bezel, and the crown. And internally, this is what we call the Rolex watch, right? Yes. And this is the Rolex Presidential internally. There's no difference in the movement? No. And so this is a top of the line Rolex. It's the beginning of the top of the line. And showing you what has been marked 119 for identification, why don't you go ahead and sit down and I'll ask you to recognize what's depicted in 119. It's a copy of an American Express statement. And is this the American Express statement for the watches that you sold at Slavic's on August 24th, 1989? Yes, as well as yes, it's for all three. And starting first with the residential Rolex, how much did that sell for back on August 24th, 1989? To the best of my recollection, in 1989 in August, that watch had a list price of about $11,758. And there is a charge on this, on these specific charge receipts for $9,968.40. Would that be the presidential model? Yes, that would have been after a discount and with sales tax. The discount policy varied anywhere from 10 to 25% off of the list price. And this presidential model Rolex, was it in your store when the defendants came in, or did you have to send them somewhere for it? No, it was not in stock. And when the defendant Lyle Menendez expressed an interest and wished to purchase it, what did you do? I located the watch at another Los Angeles location and informed him that I would be able to obtain the watch and deliver it. And when you told him that you could obtain the watch even though it wasn't in your store at the time, how did he respond? He indicated he would like to have the watch, to buy it. So what did you do? As I said, found it in another location, which was a sister store at that time, Bailey, Banks and Biddle in Torrance, and drove to Torrance and picked up the watch and drove back to the Century City with the watch. And what happened after you got the watch back to Century City? It was very late in the afternoon and my work day ended and it was there, the paperwork was concluded and it was supposed to be picked up later that evening. And was it picked up? Yes, it was. Now, there was a second watch, I understand, that was purchased, or there were three watches purchased that day. Is that correct? Correct. In calling your attention to what has been marked as People's 117 and 118, let me turn these over to you, showing you first Exhibit 117. Would you take a look at that and tell me if you know what's depicted in that photograph? Yes, I do. And what is that? That is a Rolex in stainless steel Oyster Perpetual Date Just. And showing you what has been marked as 118, do you recognize that? Yes, I do. And what is depicted in that picture? That's a stainless steel Oyster Perpetual Submariner. Now, calling your attention to 117, the photo of the Rolex in the middle, does that depict the Rolex or a Rolex substantially similar to the one that you sold the defendant Lyle Menendez on August 24th, 1989? It's substantially similar. By substantially similar, can you tell me how? For lack of a better term, watch number 2 was stainless steel. I believe that was the final decision made that the stainless steel watch with the Jubilee bracelet rather than the oyster bracelet as depicted in watch 2 and 3. Would you point out to the jury what you're talking about? The watch is the same in that it's all stainless steel. The watch, as it was received, had a slightly different bracelet than is depicted here. Here is an oyster bracelet. As it was delivered, it was a Jubilee bracelet, which instead of being a three-part flat bracelet, if you see in the photograph, it was a five-part and slightly more rounded, but essentially all stainless steel. Now, calling your attention to the act, whatever that means, that was really confusing. So now, calling your attention without seeing what they're pointing at and stuff. Calling your attention to the actual watch itself, is that referred to as a date just or a model Rolex? A date just model Rolex, yes. And what's pictured in the photograph? The Rolex in the photograph, is that a date just model Rolex? Yes, it is. And what you sold the defendant Lyle Menendez on August 24th, 1989, was that also a date just model Rolex? Yes, it was. And in terms of the actual watch itself, is that what it was that you sold the defendant? Yes, I mean, the dial would have been a different color, but essentially all the material was the same in that it was all stainless steel. And would the internal works also be the same? The movements would be identical. Now, calling your attention to the third watch up there, I believe, Submariner. Is that the Submariner model Rolex? Yes, it is. And is that what is depicted in the photograph there? Yes. And was that what you sold the defendant Lyle Menendez on August 24th, 1989? Yes, it was. And is there anything different about the photograph of the Rolex number 118 to the Rolex that you sold the defendant? No, there is not. It's the same. Why don't you go ahead and sit down? Witness does. Now, do you recall how much was paid for the stainless steel Submariner Rolex and the date just model Rolex? To the best of my recollection, they were both about the same. Uh, they were both at the same time, I believe, listing for about $1,650. And apart from selling the three Rolex watches, did you sell anything else in this transaction? Money clips. I don't remember if it were two or three, but a couple of money clips. And calling your attention to what has been marked as Exhibit 19, showing you once again Exhibit 19, do you, and specifically calling your attention to the three receipts, when you were paid for this, how were you paid for these purchases? American Express. And when you say American Express, what did you mean? An American Express Platinum card. And were all the blah, 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 sorry, were all three of these, were the watches and the money clips all purchased at the same time, or were they purchased in some order? I believe the transaction took place everything at once to the best of my recollection, and with regards to the prices that the receipt reflects, with regards first to the first one, you testified that the $9,968.40 is how much the presidential Rolex would have been after a discount. Yes. And with tax? Yes. So now, with regards to the second receipt up here, $4,762.50, what would that have paid for? Watch 2 and 3, the stainless steel model. So these two watches together. Yes. And would this reflect a discount, or was there a discount for that one? On the third watch, the Rolex Submariner, it was the company's policy at that time that that particular watch was not discounted. And finally, there is a charge for $396.56. Do you recall what that was for? To the best of my recollection, that would have been for the money clips. Now, at some point, you said that you were presented with an American Express Platinum card to pay for these. Who gave you the American Express Platinum? To the best of my recollection, it was Lyle. And that would be the defendant Lyle Menendez? Yes. And what did you do after you received this American Express Platinum card? I had to call American Express for an approval. And was this, if you recall, Platinum card in the name of the defendant, Jose Lyle Menendez, or was it someone else's name? It was not. It was under initials. The first initial was definitely J. The middle would have been an E. I can't remember exactly, and the last name Menendez. And after you received this credit card and called American Express, what happened? I spoke to a supervisor to make sure that Lyle was authorized to sign for the credit card, since it was obvious to me with the credit card in hand, his name was not written out and that it were initials. And I needed to make sure that he was authorized, in fact, to use the credit card. And did you obtain approval to ring through the sale? Yes, I did. And what happened after you received approval? Did you get any kind of identification? Yes. What did you get, if you recall? To the best of my recollection, it would have been a California driver's license or any state driver's license if the person weren't from California. That would be a photo ID? Yes. And after you got approval and you got the photo ID, what did you do? I delivered the 2 watches and money clip and had to drive to Torrance to pick up the Rolex Presidential to bring it back for delivery. Now, apart from this conversation that you had where you showed these various items to the defendants and you spoke to the defendant, Lyle Menendez, did you hear any other conversation between any of the defendants and any other person? Yes, they asked to use the telephone while they were in the store. Mr. Levin says, objection with respect to the term they. The court says, sustained, the answer is stricken. Ms. Nahara says, my question is which did either or both of the defendants ask to use the phone? Difficult question to ask after this much time has passed. One of the brothers asked to use the telephone and he was allowed to use the telephone. And do you recall which of the defendants used the telephone? To the best of my recollection, I believe it was Lyle. And did he have a conversation on the telephone that you could hear? Yes. And do you recall the defendant? Do you recall the defendant Lyle Menendez talking about money over the telephone? Specifically today, I don't remember a specific conversation about money. Okay, and did you talk to Detective Zoller on September 11th, 1989 about this matter? Yes, I did. And do you recall making a statement? Mr. Levin says, objection, Your Honor, improper for memory refreshing. She hasn't laid a foundation. Could we approach, Your Honor? The court says, are you asking about the specific reference to the phone call? Ms. Nahara says, yes, Your Honor. The court says, perhaps you can ask whether she remembers anything that was said in the phone call. Ms. Nahara says, do you recall anything about this phone call that you heard between the defendant, Lyle Menendez, and the other person? Yes, I recall some of it. And do you recall anything regarding the desire to get some money? Ms. Abramson says, I'm going to object to this and ask to approach. The court says, overruled. The witness says, I'm sorry, could you repeat the question again? Ms. Nahara says, do you recall the defendant, Lyle Menendez, requesting some money from another individual? I can't remember specifically. Money may have been a part of the conversation. I just don't remember today, quite honestly. Do you recall ever telling Detective Zoller? Mr. Gessler says, to which I object as improper refreshing of recollection. The court says, overruled. Ms. Abramson also objects. The court says, Mr. Levin, were you objecting to something? And Mr. Levin says, yes, Your Honor. He's basically saying if Mr. Levin's doing the questioning, Ms. Abramson should not be objecting. He's telling Ms. Abramson to shut up. He's such a dick. I don't like this judge. We've got the same old Stanley Weisberg presiding over the court here. All right, so Mr. Levin says, yes, Your Honor. And what is that? Your Honor, I don't believe this witness stated that, and I would ask to approach. The court says, all right, you're objecting to this not being in a police report. Mr. Levin says, well, yes. The court says, why don't you show her exactly what it is that you're going to be asking about? Mr. Levin says, we'd ask to approach. It's an improper method of refreshing a witness's recollection with a statement she didn't make. The court says, okay, you can show it to the witness and see if that serves to refresh her recollection, whether she made it or not. Ms. Nahara says, may I approach, Your Honor? The court says, yes. Ms. Nahara says, ma'am, showing you a page from an interview of a written by Detective Zoller, I'd ask that you read this paragraph here and tell me if it refreshes your recollection. The court says, just read it to yourself. And Ms. Nahara says, right. The witness does. Ms. Nahara says, for the record, in an interview with Detective Zoller on September 11th, 1989, Mr. Levin says, Your Honor, I would object. The witness says, yes, I can recall making that statement now, but I mean, is that the question? If I made that statement to the Beverly Hills Police Department, then that is what I heard on that date in 1989. Ms. Nahara says, okay, let's start with the statement. Do you recall telling the Beverly Hills Police Department? Mr. Gessler says, object to this as, again, improper refreshing of recollection. Overruled. It's also hearsay. The court says, all right, she's already given an answer. Perhaps the district attorney can follow up on the answer that she gave and see where it goes. Ms. Nahara says, do you recall making the statement? The court says, that's not what she said. Ask her now whether she remembers the statement. Ms. Nahara says, do you recall telling, as you sit there today, do you recall telling Detective Zoller? Objection, Your Honor. That's not the question that was to be asked. I'm objecting. It's improper refreshing. The court says, going back to the conversation that occurred in August of 1989. Ms. Nahara says, going back to that conversation of in August of 1989, when you heard the defendant, Lyle Menendez, talking on the phone, did you hear him request money from someone? Objection, Your Honor. This is an improper question. The proper question is, did she remember the conversation? Overruled, overruled. Do you understand the question? The witness says, I understand the question. Would you like me to tell you what I remember right now today of what I heard of that conversation, or what I can remember now that I've read a true and honest statement made to a Beverly Hills police officer? It's not my habit to lie to police. Mr. Gessler says again, I object, Your Honor, to the statement. Move it to be stricken. The court says the question is now whether or not your memory has been refreshed or any other way. This is so confusing. I mean, like, never mind. I'll just be quiet. Just tell us what you remember of that conversation that you overheard on the telephone. The witness says, I remember that the person being spoken to was named Carlos, or that's what he was called on the telephone. So Carlos Baralt, perhaps, or Carlos Menendez, one or the other. I think Carlos Baralt, likely because he was helping them financially with things, and he's the one that said, yeah, you can, he gave them permission basically to buy the watches. All right, so the witness says, I remember the eulogy upcoming sometime in the not so distant future. I don't recall a specific date that it was going to be, I believe, in New Jersey, and the watches were mentioned in that. They didn't think the East Coast relatives thought that it would be appropriate to wear the solid gold Rolex presidential to the eulogy. That is what I remember in 1995. So that was a year prior to her testimony, or in the year prior to her testimony. That's what she remembers. Ms. Nahara says, and if that's not on the record or that's not in police reports, that's going to be brought out on cross-examination. So we got to hear later what she says or how that comes out. All right, so Ms. Nahara continues, and do you recall anything else about the conversation with regards to the defendant, Lyle Menendez, requesting money of any kind? Here today, I don't have a specific memory of it. Having made the statement to the Beverly Hills Police Department in '89, Mr. Gessler says, I would object to anything further than no specific memory, move to strike. The court says you've answered the question that you don't have any specific recollection now. The witness says yes. The court says, okay. Ms. Nahara says, thank you. Now, when you say the defendant in the walking into your Slavic's jewelry store, were either or both of them carrying anything? Yes, shopping bags were carried. I don't recall if by both or one, but either Erik or Lyle was carrying shopping bags, more than one shopping bag. Beyond that, I specifically can't give you an exact number. In your jewelry store, where is it located in terms of getting to it, getting easy access? Is it in a mall? It's in an outdoor mall. Was in an outdoor mall. Is it located in such a way that you just wander by from the street, or how do you go by the entrance? It's a main thoroughfare. You have to make a conscious decision to walk through the door. Obviously, it was and is not an open bazaar or anything like that. Ms. Nahir says, I have nothing further at this time. The court says cross-examination. Mr. Gessler says, yes, Your Honor, may I approach? The court says yes. And now we begin cross-examination by Lyle's attorney, Mr. Gessler. Can you see from there, or is it easier? Yes, yes. Directing your attention to this item, the 4762. Uh-huh. On the watches, you said that's the other two watches, that Lyle purchased that day. Right. Do you remember the individual prices of those two watches? Center watch, the steel date just, was probably around 65 or 1700. 1650 or 1700, and the Submariner, the third, was more. It might have been around 2000 at that time. It's hard to recall all the prices specifically then and now, but in that range. That only amounts up to about 3700. Right. And the invoice here for the watch was 4700. Right. So was one or more of these watches more up in the 3000 category, or both were in the 2500 category? The Submariner was about 2000. It could have been 22. It is possible that it may have ultimately been decided that on the center watch, the steel date just, perhaps we at some point in the transaction may have put a diamond dial on the watch. Do you have any recollection of that? I believe that we may have done that. I believe that we may have done that if he may have selected the diamond dial for the center watch. For the center watch? Right. And so at any time, in some way, the cost of those watches was 4700. Yes, with tax. The watch on the right, the Submariner, not being eligible for a discount. Now, you've said the presidential that Lyle Menendez bought was the bottom of the top of the line. Uh-huh. Was the presidential series, was that the top of the line? In other words, was there more than one presidential watch? There's not more than one model named a presidential. No. There are various ways that it can be purchased with some more stones added on the bracelet or so forth, but it is still referred to as the presidential. So the presidential can be updated, in other words. Yes. Was it the top of the line? The top of the line would be what's referred to as the crown or center crown collection, which again is basically a Rolex presidential model, just whether it is in platinum, whether it's a completely set bracelet bezel encased with stones or not. And what did those cost in 1989? Oh, they could go as high as $80,000 or $90,000. Ooh, boy. So now the emerald, that's one of the jewels that you could add to the presidential if it was requested. Right. How much would that upgrade the value? In 1989, the price is 1,000 to 1,500 for the dial alone. So that's for the emerald on the dial? Right. Were there qualities of emeralds that could be put in? In other words, different quality gems? No, just the quality that was offered by the Rolex watch company. And this was always 1,500 for an emerald upgrade? 1,000 to 1,500 in 1989, yes. Now, this particular watch that you sold, Lyle Menendez, did you have the emerald upgrade? Or did not have, sorry. This watch sold to Lyle Menendez did not have the emerald upgrade, did it? No, it did not. It was different from the one pictured in that it had no stones at all. No stones at all, no. Do you remember if the shopping bags that one or both of the young men had from was from Bullock. What? Do you remember if the shopping bags? Oh, okay. So if any of the shopping bags that the young men were holding were from a store called Bullock's. Yes, I believe they had a Bullock's bag. And was there a Bullock's store near you in that mall? Very nearby. How would you get there from from the Bullock's store to your store? Just go out their door and come into yours? You'd have to walk by 4 or 5 stores, and then you would come upon what was then Slavik's. And then you'd come in there? Yes, walk through the door and come in. Now, did either Lyle or Erik Menendez, had they made any appointment with you or anybody in the store that day to see the watches? No. It was a drop-in type thing. Yes. The call that Lyle Menendez made to you, a person named Carlos, he was talking about the memorial service in New Jersey with them. Yes, yes. And did he do that at a phone that was located in the store? Yes. Where was the phone? On the counter between us. Right by you there? Yes. And he didn't ask for privacy or anything on the phone call? No. Made it right there while you were working on the sale. Right. Like he had nothing to hide. And that's when there was some conversation, at least on Lyle Menendez's end, about whether it would be appropriate to wear that watch back east. Yes. To the memorial service. Yes. And you didn't hear what the answer was. You just heard Lyle Menendez's end of the phone call. Yes. Did she not say that it was inappropriate in her earlier commentary? I don't want to scroll out up and lose my place, but I think she said that that was the gist of what they were talking about, was that it was probably inappropriate to wear back in the East Coast. But she didn't hear the answer to that. So they just kind of impeached her right there. All right, so now when you checked the American Express card for permission, that's when you needed a picture ID? Yes. From Lyle Menendez? Yes. And for that, an out-of-state ID was sufficient also, wasn't it? Yes. As long as it had a picture, that was good enough. Yes. And Lyle Menendez, as he was talking with you and on the phone and throughout the time in the store, he seemed fairly subdued, didn't he? Yes. Ms. Nahara says, objection, no foundation. Calls for an improper opinion by this witness. The court says, overruled. The answer will stand. Well, you guys were asking about their demeanor and things, so why not? And asking for things that might be speculative. Mr. Gessler continues, I have nothing. Oh, he does not continue. He says, I have nothing further. The court asks if Mr. Levin has anything, and yes, I'll try to be brief so we can all go to lunch. And cross-examination begins. Crossed by Lyle, rather. Or, I'm sorry, Erik's team. Erik's team is doing the cross-examination now. All right, so with respect to checking for authorization for the use of the American Express card, I take it that you knew that Lyle Menendez, or the person you believe to be Lyle Menendez, was not the person whom the card was issued to. Yes. And you also were aware, were you not, of the fact that there had been a homicide with respect to Mr. and Mrs. Menendez before you called for the authorization? Yes. So would it be your normal custom and practice, or wouldn't it be your normal custom and practice if any transaction to get identified first from the person who wishes to use the card? Not necessarily. You conduct a sale, you come to an agreement, a person makes a decision, then they hand you the credit card. Okay, but isn't it a fact that the authorization is not for the card, it's for the person's use of the card? Yes, it is. Right. Like she's only asking if Lyle can use the card rather, I mean, it's not like the card is getting declined or something. So she's, I don't know. You see the difference? Like she's asking for his, asking whether he has permission to use the card versus whether the card is a good card or not. So okay, but isn't it a fact that the authorization is not for the card, it's for the person's use of the card? Yes, it is. All right, so now in order to get authorization for the person who is using the card, you have to know who that person is before you seek authorization. Yes, correct? Yes. Okay, so you would then, under normal circumstances, ask the buyer for identification before you called for authorization? Not necessarily, no. Well, what or how would you then get authorization for a person who you do not know? You call, you give a credit card number, and you'll obviously, not obviously, but at some point, and to the best of my recollection, at some point, I know at this point that Lyle's first name is Lyle, and the credit card is handed to me and it has initials on it. How do you know that? Because I have the credit card. But how do you know that the person who handed it to you is named Lyle? At some point, you exchange names in the transaction. So you've never said that before today, have you? I don't recall. So now she's just saying, like, I just knew that that name wasn't his. How? How'd you know that? The only way that you knew that that was Lyle Menendez seeking to use the card was because he showed you identification, correct? Yes, at some point. He didn't come in and say, I'm Lyle Menendez? No, he did not come in and say that. All right. And when you called for authorization, you knew that the person who was seeking the purchase was Lyle Menendez, correct? Yes, I believe that's how it happened. Yes. I mean, if anyone just walked in off the street and handed you a credit card that looked to be a legitimate card, you would not sell them a 10,000 plus purchase, would you, without verifying who they were? No. And when you get authorization, the authorization that you're obtaining is, in essence, a guarantee, is it not, that American Express will make the purchase good for the store? Yes. So if you don't get an authorization, then American Express is not bound to pay your store if a loss occurs. No, they're not bound to pay the store, no. And you're an employee of Slavics, correct? Was, yes. Are you not trained that in order to properly assure that the store gets paid, that you must get identification before you get authorization? Yes, yes. All right. And when you testified earlier that you received identification after you got authorization, that's a mistake, isn't it? It's not a mistake in that the merchandise has not left uh the store. Nothing has been given out to a non-authorized person. Well, are you misleading the person who's giving you an authorization into thinking that you have already identified the person who is making the purchase? No, I'm sitting here today. How long after the fact? I don't remember right now. Today, did I have of the driver's license in my hand when I made the telephone call to get the authorization? No, I do not. So she doesn't remember, as she sits here today, whether she had the driver's license in her hand at the time she made the authorization call. That was just a really weird way of wording it. Did I have a photo ID and match it with the person and write down the driver's license before I gave out the merchandise? Yes. Well, my point is that American Express would not authorize to make good on a $10,000 purchase unless they were assured that the person who presented the identification or the person who presented the credit card was authorized. Correct. To make the purchase? Correct. And in order to determine who presented you the credit card and if that person was so authorized, you would have to get a valid identification. Yes, first. Yes. And the type of valid identification that you would normally ask for would be a driver's license, correct? Correct. So you wouldn't use a school identification card? No. You'd use California identification or a California driver's license? Correct. With a photo? Correct. And you would look at that driver's license, would you not? Yes. And like when you go into the supermarket and they make a little plus sign and they write all the information, the expiration date on the card of the license and things like that. Are you trained that you should do things like that? Or do you should do like ways? What? Yes. Some of the script in here is so, there's a lot of mistakes. And so, it's part of your duties, is it not, to verify that the photograph on the driver's license matches the person? Yes. And that the license appears to be authentic? Yes. And that the expiration date on the driver's license indicates that it's valid? Yes. Additionally, that the person who's making the purchase is authorized to use that particular card? Yes. And you determined, did you not, from American Express that Lyle Menendez was authorized to use his Platinum American Express credit card? Yes. And you also determined that Lyle Menendez was authorized to use that Platinum card and the card had a limit of $250,000. He didn't even come close to his limit. So, I mean, I think they make such a big deal about these purchases than they really are. And he says yes. Okay. Or she says yes. So, you knew before you called in for authorization that the parents of Lyle and Erik Menendez had lost their lives. Yes. However, when you called in for authorization, you didn't mention that fact, did you? No. Why would I? Okay, well, you knew though, or you felt confident that, strike that, you knew that the American Express had told you that Lyle Menendez is authorized to charge on that credit card up to its value. Correct. Which is 250,000. Correct. And when the telephone was it presented in a manner that was close where you were standing on the counter? When I phoned American Express, was it the same phone, by the way? No, it was not the same phone. So you walk away from the customer? Right. But there's also a phone right there for customer use. If you moved the telephone onto the counter for a customer to use, it was there for a customer to use. Okay, but the customer in this case is Lyle Menendez and he's standing directly across from you at the counter. Yes. And you at some point in time took the telephone and put it up on the counter? Correct. And Lyle Menendez, you believe, asked to use that telephone? Yes. And you asked him punch in some numbers, and you saw him punch in some numbers? Yes. And he was speaking loud enough for you to hear? We were not very far apart. But he didn't attempt to muffle his voice? No, he did not. He didn't speak with his hand over his mouth? No, he did not. In hushed tones? No. He didn't turn his back to you to talk on the telephone? No. He faced you and held the receiver and talked in normal conversational tones? Yes, he did. And this person to whom he was speaking, he identified as Carlos, correct? Yes. And he mentioned to Carlos that he, at least from the half of the conversation that you were able to discern, that he in fact had made the purchase at Slavic's. Yes. That he purchased Rolex watches. Yes. And the discussion was to the effect that although he had purchased the watches, he didn't think it would be appropriate to wear at the, you determined, to be a funeral because you heard the word eulogy? Yes. And now, and none of that was done in secret? No, it was not. And you were never asked, were you, to keep any of this transaction secret? No, I was never asked that, no. And you did verify the identification that he gave you as to be him? Yes. And he did sign his name to the receipts? Yes. Now, those photographs that the prosecution presented to you, the left being one, yes, and 2 and 3 that you astutely numbered. Uh-huh. The one on the left, the president, is not an accurate photograph of the watch that you sold to Lyle Menendez, is it? Only the dial is not accurate. The dial, meaning that there's emeralds on the dial. Correct. And that would be a substantially more expensive watch with emeralds on it, correct? At the time, an emerald dial would have been 1,000 to 1,500 additional above the base cost of the watch. Now, The type of watch that Lyle Menendez purchased, the Gold Men's President, that's a relatively common watch for Rolex, is it? Fairly. Now, you have a lot of those, or at least there's a lot of pictures of those around, isn't there? I mean, you have brochures lying around that show the men's president. Oh, certainly. When you're an authorized Rolex dealer, they never let you run out or prepare of they never let you run out of prepared take-home advertising as is referred to. I love it when they trap them into a question. Like, why didn't you give us a picture of the exact version instead of trying to make it seem like he had the more expensive one by giving that photo? He continues on with his questioning. Sure. And you would have access, would you not, to a picture of a gold president of the exact type that Lyle Menendez purchased? Would I have had it in that store at that occasion? Sure. Yes. As a brochure? Yes. And not only in your store or in every place that sells Rolexes, they would have a picture of the exact watch that Lyle Menendez purchased that day. Yes. There are literally thousands of pictures of Rolex watches without emerald dials, are there not? Certainly. And would it be more rare to find a photograph of a picture with an emerald dial? I mean, that's not in every brochure, is it? No, it's not. No, it's not what? I'm sorry? It's not in every brochure that I'm aware of. There would be in a master catalog, there would be a picture of every dial that is available to go on any watch in their line. And the type of the next question is, and the type of men's president Rolex watch is still being sold today, is it not? Yes, it is. Now, do you know where the prosecution got that photograph of the men's president with the emerald dial? No. Did you present that to them? No. Did they ever ask you to bring to them a common Rolex brochure with the photograph of the men's president that was exactly like the one that Lyle Menendez purchased? I don't ever recall being asked anything like that. And now the second photograph that's also inaccurate with respect to the type of watch that Lyle Menendez purchased, is it not? The watch is the same. Well, we can't see the movement, can we? In what aspect are you asking about? Well, for one, it doesn't have the Jubilee bracelet, correct? I don't recall exactly what bracelet it had on it. I remember it was all stainless steel. It would have been one or two. It possibly could have been a Jubilee bracelet. Didn't she just testify to that? So I may have misunderstood you. Were you talking about a Jubilee bracelet with respect to the men's president, or were you discussing the Jubilee bracelet on direct examination with respect to the stainless steel? Watch number 2 in the picture could have had a Jubilee bracelet on it. And that's not a Jubilee bracelet. No, that's an oyster bracelet. The court says, how much longer are you going to be? Mr. Levin says, just a couple minutes, Your Honor. Court says, is there going to be some redirect? And Ms. Nahara says, yes. The court says, okay, we'll do it after the lunch hour. We'll resume at approximately 1:30. Don't discuss the matter with anyone. Don't form any final opinions. Yada, yada, yada. Mr. Khan, so the jury exits. Mr. Khan says, Your Honor, we have a witness to be ordered back for 1:30. That's Mr. Eslaminia. The court says, Mr. Eslaminia, you're ordered to return back. Mr. Eslaminia says, Your Honor, I've returned 3 days in a row now. The court says you're ordered to return back at 1:30. Mr. Eslaminia says 1:30 it is. This prosecution, I would be irate if I was a witness for them because they have not gotten it together with their witnesses. And Mr. Eslamania is not going to testify until October 27th. We're on the 23rd. So we're on Monday still. All these other witnesses get um, go on the stand before him. but they ordered him back after recess. All right, the court says, all right, we're in recess, and now we come back. The following proceedings were held in open court out of the presence of the jury. The court says, okay, the jury isn't here, everyone else is. Is there something counsel want to discuss? Ms. Nahara says, yes, Your Honor, 2 matters. All right, so we have a couple arguments here. She continues on saying, the first matter is that we have Ms. Mahar here to finish, and we have Mr. Eslaminia here this afternoon, and we're just unsure, scheduling-wise, whether or not we should bring in more people for this afternoon, and if the court has any idea or counsel anybody. The court says, well, there is a hearing relating to Mr. Eslaminia. Who else did you propose to bring? Ms. Nahara says, if we bring in anybody else this afternoon, it would be Mr. Hart and Mr. Cohen. False. That's not even who they bring in because, oh, they don't bring in anybody else this day. So Ms. Maher is on the stand for the rest of the afternoon. So they don't even get to anybody else. Ms. Amerson says Cohen, I don't know if she pronounces it, or the court reporter saying this. I'm spelling it how I think it's pronounced. The court says, "Okay, are you readily available, or are they at a great distance, or what?" Ms. Nahara says they would be. I believe it was like the court says, "Hold on a sec. Pause in the proceedings. Okay, go ahead." Ms. Nahara says, approximately 1 hour, Your Honor. The court says, all right, let's see if we can deal with Mr. Eslaminia so we can deal with him next. What else? Ms. Nahara says, secondly, Your Honor, with regards to the witness that we have on the stand, Ms. Mahara, Ms. Maher, she testified previously that she did, in fact, recall giving Detective Zoller a statement, and I believe if questioned, she'll say that that statement was accurate of what she recalled of the conversation on August 24th, 1989, what she overheard being between the defendants, and in which she referred what we refreshed her memory on, and what she'll state that she told Detective Zoller is the quote that she heard the defendant, Lyle Menendez, say, I need $100,000 advance from the company immediately, no matter what it takes, and I propose to elicit that from her. I expect that there will be an objection, and rather than going to sidebar, Mr. Gessler says, there is an objection, Your Honor. First, I don't believe that statement was made by her to Detective Zoller. She has not recalled. She saw the whole thing on the stand and remembered the first 3 parts of the statement. I think before any such question is asked of her on the stand, they should make sure that they can prove it up because it can certainly cause a motion for a mistrial if she was not the person who said that to Detective Zoller. Mr. Levin says, Your Honor, if I may cite specifically to the handwritten notes of Detective Zoller, where that precise statement appears, but an individual who is the manager, known as Jay, says he recalls hearing that statement about the $100,000. With respect to Ms. Maher's handwritten notes prepared by Detective Zoller, no such statement appears. And also, Ms. Maher was shown the police report at the time of the first trial on August the 2nd of 1993, and at that time, after reviewing the statement, she said she didn't have a recollection. The court says, okay, again, it's up to the witness to testify what her recollection is. She was already asked whether she had a recollection of this. She gave an answer. If, since that question and answer were given, she has a different answer, not to that question, then I would permit that question to be asked. Otherwise, all you're talking about is past recollection recorded, and the people would have to establish the foundation for such evidence to be received, and it wouldn't come from completely this witness, but also from the person who took the statement. So, if you are prepared to establish that this is past recollection recorded, you can do that. Otherwise, it's got to be her testimony, whether it's refreshed from what she's seen or what she gave in a statement to Detective Zoller or what someone else gave. It really wouldn't matter if it refreshes her recollection. Mr. Gessler says, "Do you have something else?" Uh, Oh, sorry. He says, "Mr. Gessler, do you have something else?" Mr. Gessler says, "No. If this is going to be done, I want it done in a 402 outside the presence of the jury and not the damage being done by Ms. Nahara asking the questions and then the witness saying, 'I don't recall, I may have,' or something of that nature. That's an improper way to get that before the jury." The court says, "Well, as I said, if she can say it in her own words, she's in court. She hears what the subject matter is here that we're discussing. If that question is again asked of her and she remembers that conversation, then she can answer it." Mr. Gessler says, "But, Your Honor," the court says, "there doesn't have to be a hearing outside the presence of the jury." Mr. Gessler says, "The district attorney 3 times tried to ask the question, 'Did you say that you heard him say?'" The court says, "I'm not going to permit that because the witness has already been put on notice that that is the area that the prosecution is interested in. So she can answer whether she recalls anything else that she said during that phone call other than what she's already testified about. If she does, she can answer that. If she doesn't, then her recollection hasn't been refreshed, and that's the end of it as far as her independent recollection of the conversation. Then the people would have to lay a foundation past recollection recorded, and she wouldn't be able to say what it is there that was said because she didn't. She has no recollection of it. It would have it would have to be if the foundation is established, then Detective Zoller can say what she said she told him." Mr. Gessler says, "If it was her, yes, Your Honor." The court says, "If it was her, and if the foundation for past recollection recorded is met." Mr. Gessler says, "I want to make very sure that that question is not explicitly asked in front of a jury in the way that it was attempted to be in this morning's session." The court says, "Right, it won't be because I've already said the witness is here and knows what the area of inquiry is." Mr. Gessler says, "And that the witness understands that it's her recollection today that must be refreshed, not her recollection from 5 years ago as far as that particular part of the question is concerned." The court says, "Well, clearly, it's what she remembers now of that conversation. It could be refreshed from whatever source whatsoever. Doesn't have to be the recollection that she had before she walked into the courtroom or before she looked at any material, but her recollection after having looked at all the material and after being questioned. If her memory is now refreshed as to a different subject or a different issue than what is addressed in her direct examination, she can give that answer." Mr. Gessler says, "The only problem is some witnesses, when you say past recollection refreshed and they read something, yes, they say it's seen there when it isn't refreshed, meaning it's a present memory today, and that's what must be made clear in the question to the witness, Your Honor, that this is a refreshed recollection that she has now as she sits on the stand, if indeed it is." The court says that's the way the questioning has been going. Mr. Gessler says that would be only if it was refreshed. In other words, she now remembers something this afternoon that she did not specifically remember this morning when she was on the stand, because she was asked that question. The court says yes, again, if she has a different recollection now, perhaps there was some confusion what questions were asked and objections being made. She can give an answer now, and certainly that would open it up for cross-examination if her answer is different now than it was this morning. Mr. Gessler says, "By that time, the damage has been done, so that's why I want to make sure." The court says, "It's not damage, it's just her recollection, so that's how we'll proceed. Anything else?" Ms. Nahara says, "Just to clarify, Your Honor, I'll ask her the questions, and depending on the responses, we'll determine whether or not it's a past recollection recorded or something that she remembers." The court says, if it's past recollection recorded, you're not going to ask her the specific. Ms. Nahara says, I know that, Your Honor. The court says that specific statement just established the foundation as you're required to do. Ms. Nahara says, right. The court says for whatever or for whoever it was who can recite the statement because she has no recollection of it if that is her status. That's fine, says Ms. Nahara. Mr. Gessler says, may I have just a moment, Your Honor? The court says yes. The court says, okay, let's get the jury out, please. And now the jury is back and we are continuing our cross-examination with Ms. Good afternoon. And the witness says, hello. Directing your attention to the exhibit on the board, it was identified as Exhibit 119, which are 3 receipts uh, which you believe are related to the purchase. Would those receipts be the only paperwork that would have been generated from this transaction? No. There's another receipt. Pardon me, there's another receipt. And what information would be on the other receipt? The other receipt is entirely handwritten by me with regards to specific SKU numbers. It most likely would have the warranty number for each watch. It would have the list price, the discount amount, the discount code, a subtotal, a tax, and a total. And there's also where the signatures would be. When you say signatures, that would be, or a signature. The signature of who? The person who took possession of the merchandise. Where is that receipt? That receipt is probably in storage in Irvine, Texas. Has anyone asked you to produce or secure that receipt before today? I don't recall anyone ever asking me for that receipt. And you're just telling us now? Trial 2? We're just finding out now? And you've testified in this case at the first trial? Oh, she did testify, did she? I did not find her on my list. She says she did. Were they, I don't know. I didn't see her on my list, so I guess she did testify. Well, call me dumb. There's just too many witnesses. It's too hard to keep track. I didn't see her on my list and I searched. So I screwed that one up. Sorry, guys. So she did testify at the last trial. So she says she did, if that's what the records show. That it was August in 1993. Does that sound right? Yes. Did you see and make reference to that receipt at that time, the receipt we're talking about? I'm pretty certain that it came up in conversation at some point. Have you seen that receipt before today anywhere? Except I'm talking about back on August the 24th, 1990. Have you seen the receipt since then? I may have seen a secondary copy of it in regards to dealing with the corporate offices of Slavics in regards to American Express. But in any event, before you testified here today, no one has shown you that receipt? Not to my recollection, no. Now, I asked you before about identification that a person who would be purchasing items would be required to show. Yes? And we talked about possibly a California's driver's license? Yes. Would it be your policy also to accept an out-of-state valid driver's license if the person didn't have a California driver's license? Yes. And would you record the driver's license information on something? Yes. Is it recorded anywhere on these receipts? No. And as you sit here now, I take it that many years later you can't remember what type of driver's license was presented to you by Lyle Menendez, be it a New Jersey's driver's license or California's driver's license. That's right. I'm not the person responsible for generating these receipts. But you do not have a recollection as to whether or not he possessed a New Jersey driver's license or any other form. I don't recall the state, no. If he did have a New Jersey driver's license that was valid with his photograph on it, that would be acceptable identification for your purposes. Yes, it would be. All right. Do you recall when you were first called by the police in this case, or when you first were notified that they wanted to talk to you? Perhaps early September of 1989 or mid September. I don't, it's a very vague memory of the first time I was contacted. And was that by you contacting them or them contacting you? No, they contacted me. So you didn't think anything was suspicious about the transaction that caused you to call the police? No. No, I'm correct? Yes, you're correct. Is that a correct statement? No, I was not suspicious. Mr. Levin says, "Thank you. I have nothing further." Now we are getting into redirect with Ms. Nahara. Ms. Maher, do you still work for Slavics? No, I don't. The court says, "Does Slavics even exist anymore?" The witness says, No, sir, they're bankrupt." And Ms. Nahara says, "And the day, August 24th, when you called to determine whether or not the defendant, Lyle Menendez, was authorized to use the American Express card, when you found out he was authorized to use it, did they tell you when he first became authorized to use it?" No, they did not. Not to the best of my recollection. So you don't know how long before August 21st, 1989, he became an authorized user of the credit card? I have no idea whatsoever. And there was another receipt that, or another document that was generated at the sale. Is that right? Yes. Was that the credit card receipt? To the best of my knowledge, this is either an itemized breakdown to a client or an itemized breakdown to Slavic's corporate headquarters. I don't know which was in use at that time. Now, the document that you were telling Mr. Levin about, what was that? That was a store-generated receipt. And would the store-generated receipt have the show how much money was spent that day? Yes, it would have an exact dollar figure. Would that be the same dollar figure that would be on these receipts? It should be, yes. Objection calls for speculation. Overruled. Would that receipt state that these watches were bought? Yes. Would it have basically have the same information that's on these receipts? It would have much more information. In terms of more information, it would tell more about the descriptions of the items purchased? Yes. But in terms of the cost and how much was paid, would that be the same? Within a couple of pennies, it should be. Now, do you recall having a conversation with Detective Zoller about what you observed and what you did on August 24th, 1989? I don't know if my original interview was with a different detective, but I've given statements in the past, yes. And specifically, with regards to Detective Zoller, have you given statements to him in the past? Only regarding this matter. And have you spoken to him about this matter on one occasion or more than one occasion? In terms of an interview or in terms of telling him what it is that you observed on August 24th? To the best of my recollection, only once. Was this before you testified in the last trial? Yes. And do you recall whether or not you told him about the conversation you overheard between the defendant, Lyle Menendez, and a person on the phone? I recall giving that statement, yes. And whether it was Detective Zoller or a detective before him, I don't have that recollection, but that statement was given to a member of the Beverly Hills Police Department. Calling your attention now to Detective Zoller, do you recall giving Detective Zoller a statement about that conversation? Yes. And with regards to what you told Detective Zoller, do you recall telling him anything else besides what you've testified to in court? In regards to the telephone conversation? Correct. Brief. Ask me the question again, please. Mr. Levin says, "Your Honor, could it be reread?" And the court says, "Sure, we'll have it read back." The question was read back as follows. Question. And with regards to what you told Detective Zoller, Do you recall telling him anything else besides what you testified to in court? Witness says, not specifically, no, it's been a long time. Do you think that it might refresh your recollection to read a report on the subject? Mr. Gessler says, to which I object, Your Honor. This has already been done. The court says, okay, again, are you asking her to refresh her recollection of what she told Detective Zoller? Correct. Or to refresh her recollection now of what she remembers of the conversation? Ms. Nahara says, I'm asking her to refresh her recollection on what she told Detective Zoller. The court says, and for what purpose? Ms. Nahara says, to lay a foundation for Detective Zoller's testimony. The court says, okay, you may do that. Ms. Nahara says, thank you. Showing you a page and asking you to read the last 4 lines of that second to the last paragraph of the page. Why don't you read that and then tell me when you're done? And then Mr. Levin says, read it to yourself. And Ms. Nahara says, yes, read it to yourself. Witness says, okay, thank you. Now, does that refresh your recollection as to what you may have told Detective Zoller about this conversation? Mr. Gessler says, objects to the form of the question as to what she may have told him, Your Honor. Sustained. Does that refresh your recollection as to what you told Detective Zoller about the conversation you overheard between the defendant Lyle Menendez and another person? Vaguely. When you say vaguely, you've got to tell us what you mean by that. I mean that when I made that statement in 1989, I remembered it. How much of it do I remember now? All of it except the part about the $100,000. Objection, Your Honor, said Mr. Levin. Mr. Gessler also objects, moves to strike. And that is the thing that they didn't want her to go into, and then that's what she talks about. This is ugh, this is a circus. The one thing that they were like, Your Honor, we don't want them to go into that because we don't know if that's what she said or not, and da 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 da. And yet she goes right into it, of course, and they both object. The court says, okay, the portion, all of it, etc., is stricken as not responsive. Mr. Gessler says, move to approach the bench. The court says, okay, you can do that later on. What a jerk. I don't like Judge Weisberg, if you couldn't tell. Ms. Nahara continues, now, just as to, and without telling us what you read, just as to what you read, do you have any recollection of discussing that subject matter with Detective Zoller? I gave a statement, so I mean, that's my statement. Yes, I said that. That was a statement that I made to the Beverly Hills Police Department. Do you recall making that statement to Detective Zoller? The court says, do you want to look at section 1237, Ms. Nahara? Maybe it would help. And Ms. Nahara says, Ms. Mahar, when you spoke to Detective Zoller, were you trying to be as accurate as possible? Of course. And any statement that you made to him would have been much closer to the incident than today. Is that correct? Of course. And as you sit there, do you believe that every statement that you made to him was as accurate and truthful as it could be? It was the whole truth. Ms. Nahara says, nothing further. Mr. Gessler says, I'd like to have a moment, Your Honor. May I see the statement that you showed her? Ms. Nahara says, certainly. All right, now we're getting into some recross with Lyle's defense team here. Ms. Maher, do you recall whether it was Detective Zoller or somebody else that you talked to in September 1989 regarding this conversation? I mean, it could have been a different detective. So you don't have a specific recollection as to whether it was Detective Zoller or somebody else that you first talked to about this matter? The only other detective name that I can remember in connection with this matter, perhaps, is Lane, but I'm not at all sure. How about Linehan? Close enough. Okay, now, was that the first person that you talked to from the Beverly Hills Police Department? I believe so. I mean, to the best of my recollection, in 1995, Yes, it was probably Detective Linehan first, but memory's a tricky thing. And the first time that you've talked to Detective Zoller was 3 or 4 years later? I don't remember now. No, it was sooner than that. I don't remember. What does the record say? You have dates? Well, you're telling us that your recollection is at least vaguely refreshed of certain conversations. So we need to find out what those conversations, when those occurred, and who they were with. Okay, to the best of my recollection now, I spoke to both Detective Linehan and I believe Detective Zoller in 1988. That's the best that I can give you. And you talked to both of them about this conversation that you've just related, the phone conversation that Lyle Menendez made to the person named Carlos. I don't remember if it was one of them or both of them. Did you talk to both of them at the same time, or were those individual interviews? They were separate interviews. Then, some years later, did you talk to Detective Zoller again before your testimony in the first trial? Yes, I believe I was telephoned, at a minimum, to be told that I was going to be subpoenaed to testify. And then did he go over with you certain statements that you had made or read a report or read a report to you, anything of that nature? Specifically, I don't have a memory of that. I remember somewhere along the line with someone or maybe somewhere along the line reading that statements were made in 1989, whether who that was with, I don't remember. I honestly don't remember. And whoever the statements were made to in 1989, you saw them then 4 to 5 years later, 4 years later, 1993, certainly. That was the first time that you had seen what somebody wrote down that you had said. I don't remember if I saw it in 1989. Did anybody give you anything to look at and signed in 1989 as being your own statement of what you recalled at that time? I don't recall if I had to sign my statement when I testified at the grand jury. I don't know if I have no memory of that, of seeing anything. I could have. Okay. What about back in 1989? Did you sign any statements that you made at the Beverly Hills Police Department as being accurate as to what you actually said? I don't recall. And they weren't made at the Beverly Hills Police Department, they were made at Slavic's. All right. Do you remember at Slavic's signing any notes or reports as to being the statement that you made? I could have. I don't remember today, but I could have. If I did, you would have a copy of my signature. Well, assuming I didn't have a copy of your signature on anything, you don't recall having signed any such documents. I could have. I have no recollection of it today. And do you recall if anybody, after interviewing you at Slavic's, did anybody bring back and any kind of typed report to you to see, gee, is this what you told me? Any kind of report for her to review. I don't have a memory of that now. It's possible that they did. I would imagine their notes would show that, but I don't remember it sitting here today. Assuming that they had no notes to show that, you have no recollection of any Beverly Hills Police Department officer bringing you back a statement for you to sign for its accuracy? I don't have a recollection of that, no. So now, the conversation that you've told Ms. Nahara that you have a vague recollection of, that was your conversation with Detective Zoller before the last trial? I believe it was with Detective Zoller. The record should show who I gave it to. But it was the conversation that you had with a Beverly Hills detective before the last trial that you're referring to. Yes. And that's what you have a vague recollection of? That statement? Yes. And do you recall if you made that statement to him at that time or if he showed you a statement or how that came about? I don't recall. I You don't want conjecture. I can imagine I was interviewed and gave a statement as to what transpired. Do you have a recollection of that, or that he just showed you a statement and said, "Is this what you said, or do you know?" I honestly don't recall, sir. That's all we're asking. As you said, we don't want speculation, and your honest answer is you don't recall. Isn't that true? That's true. Nothing further, Your Honor. Anything else? And we've got some recross from Eric's side, from Mr. Levin. When the detective spoke with you, were they typing? No. In fact, were they writing, if anything? Yes. Now, the paperwork that Ms. Nahara showed you, was that writing or was that typing? Typing. So you have never seen an officer talking to you and typing in front of you? No. In fact, do you recognize what that typing was? Pardon me? Do you know from personal knowledge what that typing was that Ms. Nahara showed you? It's a copy of my statement. Well, do you have personal knowledge to that? She showed you a piece of paper with some typing on it, correct? Yes. And you hadn't seen that paper with typing on it before, have you? Have I seen my statement typed out before? No. What Ms. Nahara showed you, have you seen that piece of paper before? I don't know what specific piece of paper I've seen before, sir. I mean, and you don't know what accuracy or who prepared that document, do you? I don't know who typed that, no. You don't know when it was prepared, do you? No, I do not. And you don't know from what it was prepared from. No, I do not. Obviously, I wasn't there. Mr. Levin says, "All right, now, Your Honor, I have just one or two questions on an area I forgot during my cross. May I reopen?" The court says, "Sure." Mr. Levin says, "With respect to the demeanor of the two individuals that Lyle and Eric Menendez, um, that, sorry, let me backtrack. With respect to the demeanor of the two individuals, Lyle and Eric Menendez, that were there, would you describe their demeanor as being subdued?" Yes. Ms. Nahara says, "I'm going to object. No foundation and vague as to which one." The court has sustained. The answer is stricken. Mr. Levin says, "Would you describe Eric Menendez, the person that I'm pointing to, as his demeanor as being subdued?" Objection. Mr. Levin finishes asking his question. During his transaction, Mr. Khan says, "Objection, no foundation, overruled." You want a description of the demeanor? Mr. Levin says, "Well, I want you to answer my question if you can." Subdued. And you've used that word subdued before, correct? Yes. What do you mean by subdued? There are a lot of ways to spend almost $15,000. People usually enjoy themselves a little bit more. So they weren't like, it was no big deal to them to spend 15 grand, is basically what that shows me. They were rich, they had the money. $15,000 was like, it was nothing to them. And they didn't bat an eye. And they were also grieving and in shock, probably still from everything. But that doesn't really matter here nor there. I think it has more to do with the fact that spending that amount of money was like nothing to them. Anyways, Eric Menendez didn't look like he was having a really good time, did he? No, sir. Mr. Levin says, "All right, thanks. I have nothing further." The court says, "Okay, before the witness leaves, perhaps we can have that document that was shown to her, the portion of that statement identified and preserved in some fashion." Ms. Nahara says, "We can mark it exhibit next in order." The court says, "Show it to her and then we'll mark it so that we know what it was, so that we know it was that was shown." Ms. Nahara says, "If I may approach the witness, Your Honor." The court says, "Yes." Now we have some further redirect. And she asks, "And I'm showing you a document. If you'd look at that and then um, tell us if that document I have shown you on." Wow, my brain just completely stopped working. Okay. I'm showing you a document. If you'd look at that and then tell us if that is a document that I have shown you on previous occasions. Yes. Your Honor, may I mark this document one-page document next in order? And I believe the court says, let's exactly identify this particular document. If it's a document that you showed to her this afternoon and the portion thereof that you asked her to read, it will be 120. And identify it by making what it is that you showed her and have her identify it. Ms. Nahara says, yes, Your Honor. And ma'am, showing you Exhibit 120 for the record, and specifically, there's a part that is underlined, and actually, I believe it was this afternoon, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and fifth paragraph down. Would you take a look at that and tell us whether or not that was the paragraph that you read this afternoon? Yes, it is. For the record, Your Honor, I'm going to put a blue ink circle around it. That is what's indicated with the blue ink circle. What you read? Yes. Thank you. The court says, okay, anything else on that subject by anybody? Okay, thank you. You may step down. Ms. Nahara says, Your Honor, actually, I wanted to clarify something that Mr. Gessler, the court says, you have another question of the witness? Ms. Nahara says, yes, Your Honor. It was just to clarify as to these conversations, very short. Briefly, Ms. Mahar, as to the conversations that Mr. Gessler questioned you about concerning your conversations with both Detective Linehan and Detective Zoller with regards to when you gave them the information that you gave them at that time, that you gave them that information in all of those conversations. Were you striving to be as accurate as possible? I certainly was. And to the best of your knowledge, were you as accurate about the information as possible? Yes. And at the time that you gave all of those interviews to Detective Linehan and Detective Zoller, was the information clear in your mind when you gave it? It was clear. Very clear. Thank you, says Miss Nahara. The court says, all right, anything else? Okay, thank you. You may step down. Do you have anything further before we have this hearing? So we are going to have the hearing of Brian, what is his name? I want to say it's Brian Eslaminia, but I can't remember now. Whoops. I didn't mean to open that window. What was his first name? Amir Eslaminia. Okay, so not Brian. I don't know where I got that. All right, let's get to it. All right, so the court tells the jurors, okay, we'll take a recess. There's an issue that the lawyers and I will be discussing for a period of time. It's unclear how long it might take. We'll start, and if it looks like it's going to be a protracted hearing, we'll let you know and perhaps let you go over the lounge instead of staying here. But right now, we'll ask you to go to the jury room and not discuss the case and not form any final opinions about it. The jury exits. The court says, okay, one matter. Mr. Gessler says, you said that you wanted to approach the bench after you, Oh, the court is saying, okay, one matter. Mr. Gessler, you said you wanted to approach the bench after a question was answered by the witness. Mr. Gessler says, yes, Your Honor. I wanted to ask for a mistrial for blurting out that answer, which still has no foundation in law. I think the witness should have been admonished by the district attorney before getting on the stand, given the sensitive nature of that question and our obvious concern about it. So this is the second time they've called for a mistrial now, I think. Let's keep track. We need a counter. I think this is the second time that they have asked for a mistrial because of something the district attorney did or didn't do properly. So they're asking for a mistrial given the sensitive nature of the question and our obvious concern about it this morning, not to blurt it out intentionally or otherwise, the whole statement that is an issue. The court says, well, before we get further along in this discussion, is it your position that this statement will come out as past recollection recorded? Mr. Gessler says, no. The court says, it won't. Mr. Gessler says, it will not. The court says, why is it you feel it won't? Mr. Gessler says, because, Your Honor, I want to have, and I would ask the court to have a 402 motion before any detective testifies to that statement so that we can get the total context of the series of statements that was made, because we don't even know who said it. So how can you verify any of that? How can you verify it through the testimony of the law enforcement officer if they're the ones that may have misstated it or misquoted their own notes? So how can you have that come in that way? It needs to be, you know, verified from both ends. The court says, well, who is it that would be testifying about this as past recollection recorded? Mr. Gessler says, I believe at this point it will be Detective Zoller that they would call, although I'm not sure. The court says, are the people ready to proceed with that, or do you want to defer that until some other time? Ms. Nahara says, we can do the hearing now. We have Detective Zoller here. We weren't planning on putting him on the stand next. The court says, well, if he is the one who is going to do it, it certainly would make sense to resolve it now. Mr. Gessler says, it does, Your Honor, except I need to get some more documents. What we have brought was a file, as the district attorney did, of one particular witness. I need to find some things in context before I'm ready to proceed on the 402 motion. Those I do not have in court. I'll have to examine some documents in the office to be prepared for the 402 motion. The court says, all right, how long would it take you to get the material? He says, probably 15 to 20 minutes. Okay, if someone else can get it for you while we do other matters, or is it something you want to do yourself? Mr. Gessler says, I believe someone can. Yes, if I can have access to a phone, I believe someone can. The court says, perhaps you can do that, and we can go, and then we can go on to this other issue. Mr. Levin says, Your Honor, the defense of Erik Menendez joins in Mr. Gessler's request for a mistrial. The court says, all right, I'll defer a ruling on the motion pending hearing on the issue of whether this is going to be admissible as past recollection recorded. If it is, then it wouldn't make much sense to go forward with a hearing on a motion for a mistrial if the end result is it's going to be coming in anyway. Mr. Gessler says, that's true. The court says, so then let's give you a chance to make your phone call and then we'll go ahead with the other issue. Mr. Gessler says, thank you. Ms. Abramson says, Your Honor, are we going to do this hearing in open court? I would prefer not. The court says, I don't see any reason not to. Ms. Abramson says, spin value, Your Honor. The court says, is this something you wanted me to look at in regards to this other than what you supplied me initially talking about Eslaminia? Ms. Abramson says, the court says, either side, you have the police reports and the letter, do you not? Yes. Does Your Honor have the search warrant and all of that as well? The court signed the search warrant. Do you want a copy of it, Judge? The court says, only if it's something that I have. Okay. Ms. Abramson says, I don't see how it adds anything. The search warrant just incorporated the police report. The court says, how long do you think this hearing is going to take with Mr. Eslaminia? Does anyone have any rough idea? Ms. Abramson says, I have absolutely no idea based on the notes that we got from Detective Zoller, and I imagine Detective Zoller may have to testify in this hearing as well to interrupt. So I haven't a clue, Judge. The court says, okay, let me say this, that one of the jurors indicated that she had a medical appointment for Wednesday afternoon, that she could not change it. So it looks like Wednesday afternoon pretty much will be wiped out. And earlier on this afternoon, when we were back in session, the people asked if they needed any other witnesses. And my only thought is if this is going to be a protracted hearing, we can do that on Wednesday afternoon and fill up this afternoon with other witnesses. Ms. Abramson says they're not available for an hour, I thought. The court says, well, that would make it about 3:20 or so. Are they actually prepared to testify, or do you have to talk to them and get them ready? Ms. Nahara says, exactly. The court says, so they wouldn't be ready to testify today if they came in. Is that a fair statement? Ms. Nahara says, that's a fair statement, Your Honor. Well, why don't you just force them to do it without any preparation like you've been doing for the defense when the prosecution just springs some new exhibit on you? This is ridiculous. This judge is ridiculous. He's a joke. Ms. Nahara says, that's a fair statement, Your Honor. The court says, okay, then we'll just have to see what we can do. If we can resolve this issue involving Ms. Mahar, we'll do it, and have some more testimony from the jurors. And we'll also deal with the issue involving Mr. Eslaminia. Ms. Abramson says, are we in recess now for a brief time? The court says, in a moment, I just want to get a little more information. Ms. Towery says, Your Honor, did you indicate that there would not be any testimony before the jury the entire afternoon? Court says, no, I don't know that. Obviously, if we could, at the very least, deal with Detective Zoller if he is going to be the witness testifying on that, if the people meet the foundational requirements of past recollection recorded, we can do that. Ms. Towery says, I'm not talking about today, I'm talking about Wednesday. The court says, Wednesday? I have to clarify with the juror. She indicated 2:05. I don't know if that means her departure time or the time of her appointment, which means that either way, it's not going to be much time. Ms. Abramson says if that's her departure time, perhaps we can work into lunch. The court says we'll have to get a little more information from her. Give me a little idea of what it is that you want to litigate in this hearing. Who is asking for this hearing and what is it that you want to do? Ms. Abramson says, well, the court may recall that in a hearing and ruling on our objections to certain evidence, specifically a letter that was seized pursuant to search warrants, the court made a ruling that that letter was not admissible unless a foundation was laid that indicated that Erik Menendez, Mr. Khan says, Your Honor, at this time, before counsel goes further, if I may interrupt, at this time I would ask that the witness be excused, Your Honor, before we go further on this motion. The court says, sure, Mr. Eslaminia, step out, okay? Mr. Eslaminia exited the room. Ms. Abramson continues, so there is the issue of whether or not the people can lay a foundation that a conspiracy concerning the manufacturing of this story existed involving Erik Menendez before that letter was written. The court says, no, no. The issue was whether or not that letter was a statement made by a conspirator pursuant to furtherance of the conspiracy. That's separate from the testimony of the witness himself about conversations he had with both defendants. This was a separate communication that related to him only. I don't know if the people still, at this point, are offering that letter in the people's case in chief. Mr. Khan says, yes, Your Honor, we are. Ms. Abramson says, I'm sure they are. The court says, all right, so that is an issue to be addressed. Ms. Abramson says, the other issues to be addressed are, let me look at my notes. We received these notes from Detective Zoller the other day of his interview with this witness, which are relatively indecipherable. Not that he didn't try. He told us what the words meant, but it's impossible to know what this witness is going to say vis-a-vis contacts with our clients and contacts with counsel. And I, of course, have concerns that, just a moment, Your Honor, I'm concerned on behalf of my client that of the extent of which I'm going to be dragged into the witness testimony and in what light. So, I would like to hear what, if anything, the people intend to elicit from this witness concerning myself and any other attorneys. The court says, one moment, please. Yes, go ahead. I'm sorry. Ms. Abramson says, I'm just concerned about it because it's very difficult to figure out. He says, for example, in the opening notes that Detective Zoller wrote for September 14th, 1995, Mr. Eslaminia says, met with Leslie, I assume that's me, before parentheses, that close parentheses, the time and the trial and after. And I'm not just sure what that's supposed to mean or what my role is supposed to be in his role, whatever that's supposed to be in this case. And so I think because there is an implication involving my client's counsel, and as I have told this court just a moment, I need to allow Mr. Gessler to give his message. And I also the court says, hold on, we'll let the jurors take a little break here and see if you can concentrate and remember what you were saying. A little test. The jurors exit the jury room. The court says, okay, the jurors have left so they can go to a place more comfortable. Ms. Abramson continues. And as I have previously indicated to the court, I also am a potential witness, depending on what the witness says about why it is that he was never called to testify to the story that he says he participated in creating. And we still don't have a straight answer to that. There was nothing to that effect in the original police report, and there's a vague reference in the notes of Detective Zoller to the effect that he, meaning, I guess, the witness, was under the impression that he didn't testify because he thought it would be bad for his brother. The other thing that we need to have a hearing about vis-a-vis, speaking of his brother, this witness is our concern in our motion under 402 that the people not be permitted to elicit the fact that his brother, Risa Eslamania, is serving a life sentence for the homicide of their father. What? What? Okay, I don't know this whole Eslamania story, so this is going to be wild, I think. It seems like they concocted some, like he's saying that him and Lyle concocted some story about something or other, probably like making up the essay is what I think Eslamania is going to say. And somehow that Leslie knew he was going to lie on the stand or something, or Eric, I'm sorry, Eric, not Lyle. Because he was Eric's friend in high school. He went to high school with Eric. So this is going to be interesting because now Risa, the brother of Amir Eslaminia, who's testifying in this, Risa is serving a life sentence for the homicide of their father, and that his brother was allegedly a member of the Billionaire Boys Club, which is the BBC, which they talked about at length in the first trial because it was a movie about some rich kids who took the life of their father or something. I don't remember, but it's very similar in um, kind of this whole theme. The rich kids taking out their parents, and that was it didn't have anything to do with SA, but it was you know sensational television at the time, like a made for TV movie or something. All right, so the court says, okay, last things first, did you intend to bring that out? Mr. Khan says, yes, I think that that would be relevant. I think that that is going to come into play with other evidence that's going to be presented during the course of the trial. So I think that is something that the court says during the people's case in chief. Mr. Khan says, perhaps not during the people's case in chief. We can defer presenting that and call him as a rebuttal witness. I don't know if that would necessarily be, I just don't know how the defense is going to present that information. I anticipate that's going to come out at some point in the trial. The court says it doesn't sound to be relevant during the people's case in chief at this point. Ms. Abramson says, I don't know how it's relevant in the defense's case either. The court says, I don't want to worry about that. We'll deal with the people's case in chief only. All right, who wants to proceed? Who wants to call this witness and who wants to ask questions? Ms. Amerson says, as far as we're concerned, this is the prosecution's witness and there are these issues, and I think we should be calling him and putting him on. Mr. Khan says, I disagree. I think that we're ready to call the witness before the jury. If counsel has some inquiry that she would like to make of him, which necessitates this hearing, as far as this hearing is concerned, the witness's counsel is calling the witness for the hearing. We're not calling the witness for the hearing. The court says, no, no. The court had sustained an objection as to the use of the letter written by Lyle Menendez on the basis that the people have not established a foundation for its admissibility, so the people would have the burden, if you want to use that in your case in chief, to establish the foundation for its admission. Mr. Khan says, all right, I propose that we do that in front of the jury. The court says, well, obviously not. So if you want to do that, then we can try to do that now if that's the only thing that you want to bring out. Mr. Khan says, all right, I'll do that now. The court says, all right, let's proceed. Let's get him in. Ms. Abramson says, now, just because the people have a right to question, we still would object to leading questions. The court says, is it the defense position that you have not interviewed this witness? Ms. Abramson says, we have not interviewed this witness. He refuses to be interviewed, Your Honor. We've not interviewed him since all this started. We interviewed him earlier. I did. Ms. Lansing did. All right. So now we're getting to the hearing. All right. So he is called to the stand. The clerk swears him in. Mr. Khan is doing the questioning. Your Honor, I have an evidence envelope containing a letter. May this be marked as 121? The court says, all right. Mr. Eslaminia, I'd like to show you what has been marked as 121 for identification. I'm removing a letter from an evidence envelope, and I'd like to ask you at this time to take a look at that letter. Ms. Abramson says, Your Honor, at this time I have to excuse a witness. Henry somebody left the courtroom. Okay. Mr. Khan says, would you remove the pages from that letter? Certainly. From the envelope, that was. Yes. Okay. Do you recognize the letter that I have handed you? I do. And is that a letter that you received in the mail? It is. When did you receive that letter? It's postmarked July 9th of 1991. And do you recall receiving it in 91? I do recall receiving it. The question is, when do you recall receiving that letter? I don't recall that. Can you give us an approximate date? I'd say around July 9th of 1991. How'd you come up with such a specific date? He said approximate, and he's like, July 9th. Like, okay. All right. And is this the postmarked further dated, and it is postmarked further dated, and does it say the 9th of July of, oh my God, I cannot talk anymore. I've been reading for too long. I need to take a break. Okay, and is the postmark further dated, and it does say July the 9th of 1991? Yes. So it is your best recollection that you received it about that period of time? I guess so. Now, directing your attention to the defendants in the case, Erik and Lyle Menendez seated at counsel table. Do you know these two men? I do. Can you tell us when you first met Erik Menendez? I met Erik Menendez sometime in my final year at high school. And where did you go to high school? Beverly Hills. And was Erik Menendez going to Beverly Hills High at that time? He was. And when was your final year in high school? That was 1989. Do you recall what part of the year that you met him? I don't. And, however, pardon me, I suppose that could be obtained through records because we had a history class together, Mr. Stern, and so find out when Mr. Stern taught and we can find out exactly. Okay, and from that time that you met him in 1989 up until the time of the defendant's arrest in March of 1990, did you have an opportunity to socialize with him? I'm sorry, would you repeat the question? Yes. Did you have an opportunity to socialize with the defendant from the time that you met him from 1989 up until the time of his arrest of March of 1990? At first, not very much so, and he was, at the time, friends with and shared a class with a girlfriend of mine. And one night there was a preview or something somewhere, and that was the first night that I was introduced to Erik. However, before that, we were in the same class. Okay, and how often did you see Erik Menendez or get to talk to Erik Menendez during that time period? From the time that you met him up until the time that he was arrested? I can't say for sure. Okay, was it on a frequent basis? No, I don't think it was on a frequent basis. What did your relationship with him consist of during that period of time? It consists of me knowing that he went to my school and vice versa. Did you ever speak to him? I'm sure I must have, but again, as to the frequency of it, Mr. Khan, I cannot comment on it. Okay. But my question is, were you a friend of his during that time period? We were getting to know each other, yes. So you did speak to him from time to time? Absolutely. Did you go anywhere with him, go to parties or other events with him, or see him at such events? No, not until after the deaths of his parents. And then that would be in August of 1990. Is that when you're referring to? I'm sorry, August of 1989? Is that when? Yes, I suppose that would be the time. Okay, now what happened as of then, as of August of 1989? What was the nature of your relationship? As of, yes, or prior to? As of that time after the death of their parents. Well, naturally, I felt quite bad for the boys since the messenger of misery had knocked on their door. Of course, that was before I found out that it was they themselves. So, having a similar family experience myself, I had a lot of compassion and sympathy for the boys. And so that's when I put in several calls to his friends and sent my sympathies through mutual friends to Eric. Okay. And once you expressed your sympathies to him, so they weren't even really friends before then until after the deaths? So once you expressed your sympathies to him, did the nature of your relationship change? That is, did you see him more often than you had previously? I wouldn't say more often because we were no longer in the same class together. Did you see him less frequently than you had previously seen him? Yes, I'd have to say that. Okay, and up until the time of his arrest in March of 1990, did you know the defendant, Lyle Menendez? No. Now, so he was only friends with Eric. Now, as of the March of 1990, did you have occasion to see the defendant, Eric Menendez? After 1990? Yeah, March of 1990. Did I see Eric Menendez after his arrest? So after his arrest, yes. His arrest was March 1990? Yes, assuming that's the date of his arrest, did you have occasion to see him after he was arrested? Yes, I went and visited with him, with Mama in the jail. By Mama, you're referring to the elder Mrs. Menendez. Miss Abramson says, Your Honor, could I ask the witness to drop the microphone? The court says, yes. Why don't you pull that mic closer to you to speak into it? I apologize, says the witness. Mr. Khan continues, Are you referring to his grandmother? Yes, I am. Can you tell us how many times you have visited Eric Menendez in jail? I do not know that for sure, sir. Can you give us an approximation? Anywhere between 1 and 20 times? Uh, that's his approximation. Anywhere between 1 and 20. That's a lot. That's kind of like a big range. So you're not sure if it was 2 or not? No. Perhaps it was only once. Is that what you're saying? Somewhere between 1 and 20, I'd say. And do you have any idea as to whether it was more likely 2 times as opposed to 19 times? No, I don't. Okay. Do you have any problems with your memory? I do. What type of problems do you have? Well, I don't remember some things sometimes. And you indicated in response to an interview that you had with myself and Detective Zoller that you anticipate that in this case that you were going to have trouble remembering things. Is that correct? Well, the way I remember it, Mr. Khan, for 3 hours you wanted me to remember a certain thing, and that certain thing I could not remember. And what certain thing was that? I don't remember. Did you? Were you asked to try to remember everything you could concerning your relationship with the defendants? No, I believe it was one particular thing that you had kept asking, and with Mr. Zoller standing behind me and the lovely lady next to me and you in front of me with your feet in my face, and for 3 hours not receiving the answer that you were so ardently seeking, I again said, I don't remember, and I said, I don't see why you want to call me to this trial because the things that are relevant for you, I don't remember. Um, so this almost sounds like they were trying to coerce a certain answer out of him. And when they weren't getting an answer, they were getting frustrated with him. And he was getting frustrated with them and saying, I don't know why you need me to testify at this trial because I can't remember anything. That seems like what he just kind of recapped for us. All right, so did someone have their feet in your face, Mr. Eslamania? Yes. What do you mean by that? Well, I felt that the demeanor of yourself was that you were very eagerly anticipating my arrival and you were very nice and courteous when I first came. But towards the end of the meeting, after 4 hours, you didn't want to see me anymore because I suppose that what I had said didn't match well with your defense or your prosecution strategy, I suppose. I'm not sure. I have notes, however, at home on what it is. If you remember, I was taking notes. Well, you implied repeatedly during that interview that you were going to be a bad witness. Is that correct? I had said that I don't see how I could be a good witness for you since I don't remember the things that Mr. Khan says, Your Honor. I suggest Ms. Abramson says, Your Honor, before this goes on, we would like to have discovery of the witness's notes of this meeting because there is nothing in Detective Zoller's notes that reflect that. The court says that request is denied. We're going to continue with the hearing. Mr. Khan says, and you even suggested at one point that the judge might have to put you in custody because you might not answer any questions. Is that correct? I said that the worst case scenario is that I'd sit in custody through the end of the trial. Yes. That's something that you were willing to do. Is that correct? That's something that if it was necessary for me to do, I would have to do. Okay, now you visited Eric Menendez between 1 and 20 times in jail. Is that correct? And when you would visit him, would you go alone? Sometimes alone. I think most of the time with the grandmother, Mrs. Menendez. Most of the times? Are you suggesting that it was more than once? Yes, it was at least twice. I'd say between 4 and 16 times. Oh my God, it went from 1 to 20, now it's 4 to 16. So 4 to 16 times. Do you understand, Mr. Aslamania, that you're required to tell the truth here? I do, sir. Are you trying to tell the truth? To my best, I am, sir. Can you tell us why just a moment ago I asked you how many times you visited Eric Menendez in custody and you said between 1 and 20, and now you're saying it was between 4 and 16? With Mrs. Menendez, it was 4 and 16 times. In other words, there were some times that I went alone and with others and not with Mrs. Menendez, but the spectrum as to how many times it was with Mrs. Menendez is 4 and 16. Again, that's a very wide range. So do you feel that I'm not telling the truth, sir? I'll ask the question, sir. Very well. So what you're saying is you do recall now that you visited Eric Menendez in jail at least 4 times. Is that correct? Yes, sir. Okay. Can you tell us why just a moment ago I asked you how many times you visited Eric in jail and you could not give me a better estimate than between 1 and 20? Don't know. Ms. Abramson says, Your Honor, I'm going to object at this point as argumentative. The court says overruled. His answer is don't know. Next question. Mr. Khan continues, Can you tell us, sir, why it is when I asked you that question you did not say between 4 and 20 times? I cannot, sir. Are you lying? No, sir, I'm not. Are you taking these proceedings lightly? No, sir, I'm not. Have I not cooperated with you since the beginning, sir? The court says, Don't ask questions, just answer the questions. Your next question, please. Mr. Khan says, Now, in addition to going with Mrs. Menendez, did you sometimes visit the defendant, Eric Menendez, outside of her company? Yes. Okay, and can you tell us how many occasions it was that you visited Eric Menendez outside of the company of Mrs. Menendez? No, I don't, sir. Was it more than once? I think it might be, yes, sir. Now, did you also visit Lyle Menendez in jail? I believe I did, yes, sir. And can you tell us why first of all, can you tell us why you began visiting Eric Menendez in jail? Why? Yes. Well, because he was in jail, sir. And what did you have to do with him? Or what did that have to do with you? Sorry. Blah, 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 blah. And what did that have to do with you? He was somebody I knew, and jail isn't a good place. So you felt some sympathy for him. I did. And you wanted to console him? Miss Abramson says, object to leading, Your Honor. Overruled. I just wanted him to see an outside face, I suppose, sir. Did you regard yourself as a friend of his? I did. And can you tell us why you began visiting Lyle Menendez in jail? Because he was Eric's brother. And once again, what did that have to do with you? Well, Eric's pains being Lyle's pains and vice versa, and Lyle and Eric being a friend of mine, then naturally I would have sympathy towards Lyle's hurt and incarceration. I mean, that's a solid answer and totally makes sense to me. Can you tell us when it was that your visits to Eric Menendez began? No, I cannot, sir. Can you tell us when it was that your visits with Lyle Menendez began? No, not exactly, sir. I cannot. How many times would you say you had an occasion to visit Lyle Menendez? I would say maybe 4 to 7 times. 5, 6 times, maybe. You hear me, Mr. Khan? What's that? 5, 6 times, maybe. So on the occasions that you visited Lyle Menendez, Ms. Abrams says, Your Honor, before this goes on, I think we're having a discovery crisis. The court says, are you having a discovery of crisis or a crisis of discovery? Ho ho. Ms. Abramson says, a crisis of discovery, Your Honor. I think the people have some documents that they haven't shown us that may relate to this witness, who they have had on their witness list for months, and I think it's a little late. Mr. Khan says, what does she base that on, Your Honor? I have no idea. I'm looking in my briefcase for something, and it has nothing to do with counsel. The court says, let's proceed. Ms. Abramson says, we want to know if the people have in their possession any sheriff's documents of any kind relating to the witness or potentially relating to this witness. Mr. Khan says, we've provided all discovery in this case, Your Honor. Ms. Abramson says, was that a no? The court says, let's proceed. Mr. Khan says, on the occasions that you visited Lyle Menendez, those 5 or 6 occasions, did you go with anyone? Yes. I don't recall with who, though. So you went with someone. There was always someone there. Was it always the same person or was it different persons? No, I'd have to imagine that it varied. Can you tell us who those persons were? I remember one time it was Lyle's girlfriend, I believe, and the other times I can't be too sure about. Now, Lyle's girlfriend, who are you referring to? Miss Pisarcik. Or Pisarcik? Pisarcik, I think. I believe is her name. So, how many times did you visit Lyle Menendez and Miss Pisarcik? I believe just one time. And on the other occasions that you visited him, who were with you? Sometimes alone, maybe a couple times alone, and then another time or two with the grandma. Now, did you ever have an opportunity to visit Eric Menendez and Lyle Menendez at the same time? At the same time? I'm going to object to the question as vague, Your Honor. Are you talking about at the jail? Even that's vague. I think you can only visit one person at a time, the witness says. Mr. Khan says, that's my question. At all the times that you went to visit either Eric or Lyle Menendez, you only met with one of them at a time. Is that correct? The way it works is you fill out a visiting slip. One person does for the other person that you're waiting to visit, and then they call that person down to a special booth and you sit there across a plexiglass with a telephone. Okay. So you see, you couldn't visit with both of them at the same time. Okay. Now, during that period of time, do you know when you began visiting Lyle Menendez? No, I couldn't say for sure. Okay. Up until the time of the first trial, do you recall the first trial in this matter? I recall there being a first trial, yes. Up until the time of the first trial, can you tell us how many times you visited with Lyle Menendez? I cannot, sir. Up until the time of the first trial, can you tell us how many times you visited with Erik Menendez? I thought we'd already gone through this, sir. The court says, what's your answer? 1 to 20. He's back to that again. Mr. Conso, so you are saying then that you did not visit Erik Menendez once the first time trial started? No, actually, once I found out that they themselves were involved in the homicides, relations sort of became very different. And when you say that relations were different, what do you mean by that? Well, at that point, they just, different tone, I guess I would say. What do you mean by a different tone? Well, before then, sir, I thought that they were innocent to this crime. And then after I found out that it was them that actually did it. And so, therefore, the relationship that we had that was predicted on my belief of their innocence was no longer valid. And however, I maintained, courtesy towards them whenever I was contacted by them. However, it turned into rather than a friendship, rather me praying for their souls and their well being and eternal justice and things like that. So when you say that you maintained courtesy when you were contacted by them, how would they contact you once you learned that they were responsible for the homicides of their parents? Yes, that's a good question. I moved away and I don't recall how they would get a hold of me, but I moved several times, one time to San Francisco and another time to Northern California and back again when I went for school. So, when you say that they contacted you, are you referring to telephone calls or correspondence? Yes. So, you're referring to both? Correspondence. And so, once you found out that they were responsible for the homicides of their parents, you received correspondence from who? I believe after some time, after I had found out that I wanted it to be clear for them that I did not judge them. However, a foundation of the relationship was naturally, diminished. And so one time I spoke with Erik and I asked him how his well-being was doing, and he said that things were going along and they were about to get into the first trial and they're going full force with the truth of the matter. So before the first trial started, Erik confided in this friend or acquaintance, I would rather say. But I mean, a friend would show up at your jail, not an acquaintance. So I guess they were friends, or he thought of them as friends. I don't know. But anyways, so before the first trial, Erik already told him the truth of the matter is going to be coming out. So the abuse, all of that information that came out in trial about Jose and Kitty and the way that the brothers were so severely maltreated. So, once again, my question is, who did you receive correspondence from after you found out that the defendants were responsible for the homicides of their parents? I believe solely Erik, but I've heard from Lyle since then as well, so I'd have to say both of the brothers, Mr. Khan. Correspondence from both? Yes. Written correspondence from both. I don't know if it was written correspondence. So by correspondence, you include in the term telephone calls as well? Anything that would correspond me with them, yes. So you received written materials only from Erik Menendez since the time that you learned of that they were responsible for the homicides of their parents, is that correct? Would you repeat that? Yes. You received written materials only from Erik since the time that you learned that they were responsible for the homicides of their parents. Is that right? Did I say that? No, I'm asking you. Have I? No, I haven't. So, are you saying that you also, as a matter of fact, no, yes, I have. He sent me a book. Who are you referring to? Erik did. Erik Menendez sent you a book? What type of book was that? It was a book by a gentleman by the name of, let's see, O.G. Mandino. That's right, O.G. Mandino. Did you also receive correspondence from Lyle Menendez? And I'm referring to written correspondence since that time. No. Can we talk about that letter here? Because after the letter is when once that letter had finished, that's when all correspondence of that sort ceased, Mr. Khan. So when you say all correspondence ceased at that point, are you saying that once you received the letter from Lyle Menendez, you had no telephone calls and no written communications whatsoever with either defendant? Is that correct? No, no, I apologize. Correction. What I mean, once I found out that that they were guilty and that they had none of my no longer willingness to cooperate as far as this way they have themselves voiced their intention to go for the truth in the matter rather than trying anything else. Then that's when our correspondence came to almost a standstill. And until after the trial or after the trial was over, and then sometime I hear from him every so often. I also have a brother in jail, so I'm used to collect calls. All right. So what you're saying is that you still maintained telephone contact with the defendants even after you received the letter from Lyle Menendez. Is that correct? Yes. Did you receive any written communications from Lyle Menendez since the time of the letter that you have already identified here in court today? I don't recall, but I don't think so. Now, when was it that the statement that you repeatedly referred to, the time that you learned that they were responsible for the homicides of their parents? When did I find out? Yes. I can't be sure as far as time goes, sir. In relationship to the letter that has been identified here in court, can you tell us when it was in relationship to that letter that you found out? Certainly. The letter's July 1991, and when did the first trial begin? Just tell us the best you can recall. Well, I recall that it was sometime before the trial and 7 to 10 months after receiving the letter. Now, prior to receiving this letter from Lyle Menendez, did you have conversations with Lyle Menendez concerning you testifying in this case? Yes, I did. And can you tell us on how many occasions you had those conversations with Lyle Menendez? On only a couple of occasions, sir. And on those occasions when you had such conversations, were you alone or were you with someone? No, the conversations took place solely betwixt Lyle Menendez and myself. Who says betwixt? And he's like a young 20-something-year-old who says betwixt. And when that in person, or was that in person in county jail, or did you also have any written communication or telephone conversations concerning testifying in this case? No. As far as written, I believe that's the sole one there, and I can imagine that most of our conversations were through the plexiglass. Ms. Abramson says, I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last few words, Your Honor. The court says most of the conversations were through the plexiglass. Can you imagine? Mr. Khan says, do you recall any telephone calls from Lyle Menendez prior to the time that you received this letter concerning your being a witness in this case? Ms. Abramson says, well, I'm going to object to that. The witness says no. Ms. Abramson says she's objecting to the description of the letter. The court says, well, the question didn't relate to the letter in any way other than receipt of it. The question had to do with the tenor of the phone call. Ms. Abramson said, he said other than this letter relating to how he tied the two together. The court says, I tied it to the phrase relating to these phone calls. Ms. Abramson says, all right. Mr. Khan continues, and prior to receiving the letter that you identified here in court, did you also have conversations with Erik Menendez concerning being a witness in this case? No. However, he told me that maybe I can stand up for him and say he's a good guy and stuff. That is the only type of conversation that you had with Erik? Yes, other than that, what his plan would be as far as trial goes. I told him that I thought jury selection was very interesting. So now he's attending his trial too, and the jury selection process, because public, it's public to sit through like a jury voir dire. Um, if you would want to, I don't know why you would want to, but you can. Media does it and whatnot when a trial's about to begin and they are impaneling a jury. So it's not uncommon to be around for the jury selection, so that he must have gone to see the jury selection. Now, do you recall in your conversations with Lyle Menendez, did Lyle Menendez ever indicate to you that he had wanted you to testify during the trial? Yes. I believe you have it right in there in front. I believe you have it right there in front of you. Okay. That conversation that you're referring to, that subject matter is something that is contained in the letter that has been identified and marked in court. Is that correct? Solely, yes. But now, prior to the time that you received this letter, did you have such conversations with him in person? No. So, is it your testimony that this is the first time that when you received this letter from Lyle Menendez, that this was the first time that you had ever had a conversation of this nature with him? Of that nature, yes. In this letter, Lyle Menendez says, "Here is an outline of what you need, or what we need. It is not crucial that your story matches ours perfectly, so don't worry." And that was a quote. And then he proceeds to tell a story that he wants you to testify. Is that correct? I believe so. It's been a while since I read the letter. Mr. Khan says, let me have you take a look at it and ask if this refreshes your memory. Well, I'll take your word for it. Ms. Abramson says, Your Honor, I'm going to object. That's not the way the letter begins. The court says, okay, he can read the entire letter and see if, just read the whole letter. The witness says, very good, Your Honor. It begins, hello, I hope you're well. The court says, just read it to yourself. Have you read it? Have you had an opportunity to look at that? I have. And somewhere near in the first few paragraphs of this letter, Lyle Menendez begins by saying, Here is an outline of what we need. It is not crucial that your story match ours perfectly, so do not worry. Ms. Abramson says, Excuse me, Your Honor, the witness just read the letter, so what's the point? The court says, well, he's examining the witness at this point. Mr. Khan says, Do you recall that? Yes. Okay. And was it your understanding when you read that Mr. Gessler says, which I would object as leading already? Overruled. Mr. Khan says that you had, what was the beginning of the question? He said, and was it your understanding when you read that you had, where did I leave off? That you had no idea that he was going to be telling you about it? No, I remember that he was looking for stratagem, but you received that letter, it became clear. So he had discussed some sort of strategy with you before. No, just the fact that he was looking for one. And how did you know that he was looking for a strategy? Because he had been charged with homicide, sir. And you had visited him in the county jail prior to the time that you received that letter, is that correct? Yes. And during the visits that you had with him, did he tell you that he was looking for a strategy? Would you repeat that? Is that not what you just asked a second ago? During the time that you visited him in county jail, did he make reference to what he was going to be doing as a strategy? No, no, he was just, looking to work his way through the homicide trial, I guess. So did he tell you that he wanted you to be a part of that strategy? I had voiced my willingness to be of any assistance in the matter, and I suppose this is how it manifested itself. And did you voice your assistance, your willingness to commit perjury for him? No, sir. So you said, whatever I can do for you, I'd be happy to help, something to that effect? I said, let me know, yes. And when you said that to him, you meant something that was not in violation of the law, I take it. No, sir. I meant that I believed his parents had just gotten shot and he had been charged wrongly. And so, whatever I could help, whatever I could do to help that injustice whatever I could do to help that injustice along, it would be more than my pleasure. Did you specify what you were willing to do or what you were not willing to do? No, we never really talked specifics. Did you ever imply to Lyle Menendez that you would be willing to provide fabricated or false testimony? No, however, that may have been clear from my alacrity. What? Alacrity? Alacrity? Let me look that word up. Why is this old young kid, know so many words? Hold on. It's pronounced alacrity, and it means a brisk and cheerful readiness. So his readiness to help, I guess, is what he's saying. So no, however, it may have been clear from my willingness to help. In what? My willingness to help, to want to help. That you could be willing or you would not be willing. That's right. Which one is it, sir? That I would be willing to provide false testimony, to provide assistance. But what I'm saying, or what I'm asking you, did you ever imply in your conversations to Lyle Menendez? I see. That you would be willing to provide false testimony. Yes, naturally. So he said he was willing to provide false testimony? Okay. Ms. Abramson says, "What was the answer?" Like she's shocked too. And the court says he said yes. So he was willing. Forget it, withdraw the objection. And Mr. Khan says, "Can you tell us why you were willing to provide false testimony for the defendant?" Well, at that time, it was, in a rather elementary state. It was none of the facts had become clear or uncovered yet, and I felt like anything I could do in this particular situation, being of a mental frame of mind, being, if you would, of the paradigm that the parents uh, lost their lives and they're innocent. So, therefore, I felt like anything was possible. Uh huh. And did you discuss any possible scenarios with him concerning what type of false testimony you could provide? Just what you have in front of you, sir. That is something in the nature I'm talking about prior to the time that you received the letter. No, again, there was nothing prior to that of that sort, of that nature. Okay, so when you inferred or when you implied in your testimony that you would be willing I'm sorry, when you implied in your conversations that to Lyle Menendez that you would be willing to provide false testimony, I implied anything and false testimony would come under that. So are you saying that you would go to even greater lengths to help? Would I now? At the time, are you saying that you would have gone to even greater lengths than providing false testimony for the defendant in order to help him? It's hard to say. If you want to say that, that's fine. That's hard to say. I'm asking you. No. Are you saying that you would have gone to greater lengths than to provide false testimony to help him? Well, it's difficult to guess as far as in retrospect goes, but who knows? So once you volunteered to do that, is it your testimony that there was no further discussions whatsoever prior to the time that you received this letter? Uh-huh. Concerning the exact nature of it. What you might do for him in this case. Will you repeat that one more time? Were there any discussions whatsoever concerning what you would be willing to do for him in this case, other than what you already told us prior to the time that you received this letter? Prior to the time yes, that I received the letter, did I say there would be anything else I would like to do? Prior to the time you received this letter from Lyle Menendez. Yes. Did you have any further discussion whatsoever concerning the specifics of what you would be willing to do to assist him? Prior to receiving that letter? Yes. Well, it's a bit I'm a bit confused here. I don't know if I've been through this question before or you're asking a whole new question, so I don't know what you mean. Whatever I had volunteered as far as my efforts manifested themselves in that letter. I felt after receiving that letter and Lyle's reception of it, after I had gone through it, I think that he got the point that, well, that's a little far-fetched. And so things sort of ceased at that point. I understand what you're saying. What I'm asking you is this. Once you told Lyle Menendez that you would do whatever you could to help him, yes, and prior to the time that you received this letter, were there any conversations whatsoever concerning the specifics of what you would do to help him? Other than that, other than this, no, sir. Why was that so hard? This guy does not want to answer questions. It's going to be a long hearing, I think. So now you recall telling Detective Zoller in conversations with him. Uh-huh. Ms. Abramson says, I'm going to object to that general form, Your Honor, in conversations. The witness says, uh-huh. Overruled. Do you recall telling Detective Zoller in conversations with him that you had discussed with Lyle Menendez, uh-huh, during your visits with him, a scenario where you had given Erik Menendez a handgun for protection? Mr. Gessler says, to which I object as assuming a fact not in evidence that such a discussion was held and that such words were said. When you say, do you recall, it assumes facts not in evidence. The court says he's asking him, does he recall that? Objection overruled. Mr. Gessler says, I think he's asking him to recall something we don't know happened. The court says, you mean the conversation with Detective Zoller? Mr. Gessler says, no, the conversation happened, but do you recall saying? Assumes that the words were said, do you recall? Is like, do you remember saying this? Which I agree to that, how it sounds. And has a predicate to it that words were in fact said, which we don't know that they were. The court says, okay, I understand your objection, but it's overruled. Mr. Khan says, yes, do you understand the question? Please repeat it. Yes. Do you recall having conversations with Detective Zoller in which you indicated that you had meetings with Lyle Menendez in which there were discussions in which concerning you testifying to a scenario in which Erik Menendez asked you for a handgun for protection? That objection and asked to strike the word indicated words were either said or they were not. Overruled. Yikes. Okay. The witness says, why else would we be here now? Mr. Khan says, so did you have such conversations with Lyle Menendez? With Lyle Menendez or Detective Zoller? Well, I'm asking you first now about Lyle Menendez. Did you have such discussions with Lyle Menendez in regards to that letter? The witness asks. Not in regards to the letter. The question I put to you is whether you had told Detective Zoller that you had conversations with Lyle Menendez discussing a scenario in which Erik Menendez asked you for a handgun for protection. That letter. Do you recall telling Detective Zoller that before that letter was received, you had such discussions with Lyle Menendez? I'm going to object, Ms. Abramson says, to the form of the question, Your Honor. We don't have any discovery that that statement was ever made. The court says it appears to be contained in a general sense in the report of Detective Zoller. Objection overruled. The witness says, so, your question is, did I tell Mr. Zoller that I had spoken with Lyle in regards to potential things that we could do together once and if the trial came around? My question was, do you recall telling Detective Zoller that you had conversations with Lyle Menendez concerning testifying to the scenario that is outlined in that letter, and that such conversations occurred prior to the time of that letter? Prior? Yes. No, sir. So you never said that to Detective Zoller. I might have said that to Detective Zoller. I might have not. Detective Zoller might have written that down accurately or inaccurately. I don't know. But as far as in actuality, me speaking with Lyle, as far as scenarios go prior to that letter, there was none. Okay. But as far as your statement to Detective Zoller, did you ever make such statements to Detective Zoller? Ms. Abramson says, again, I'm going to object. The police report doesn't indicate that statement, so if counsel has it, I'd like to see it. The court says, I understand, but there is general reference to it in the report, but not as being prior or post or anything like that. That's the problem. Objection overruled. Mr. Khan continues, you may answer the question. Please repeat it, says the witness. Yes. Did you tell Detective Zoller that there were meetings that you had with Lyle Menendez discussing a scenario that is referred to in the letter prior to the time that you received that letter? If I told Mr. Zoller that, then it was a mistake. So you were mistaken? Uh-huh. Do you recall? Or maybe he misinterpreted my having voiced my eagerness to help as a potential scenario. I don't know. Police reports are kind of a funny narrative, you know? Uh-huh. Now, you first told Detective Zoller that you had a letter in your possession on October the 12th of 1994. Do you recall that? Same letter? Yes, the letter that I'm referring to here. This is mind-numbing to have to try to ask someone questions who doesn't either want to understand or doesn't want to answer the questions. This guy, even though he's testifying or would be testifying for the prosecution if they let him in, which I have a feeling that he's going to testify on Friday, um, of this coming week here in 1995. But uh, no, I totally lost my train of thought. I don't remember what I was saying. That he not only is he going to testify. Oh, he's testifying for the prosecution. I remember. He's testifying for the prosecution, but he's almost like a bad, I mean, he is a bad witness for the prosecution in that he's not a great witness. He's not answering questions. He's not being truthful or forthcoming, it seems. And he asks more questions than he answers, apparently. So it's almost, and he's even a little hostile to the prosecutor. So it's kind of interesting that he's not really, for the defense or for the prosecution. He's kind of in between here, which I don't know. That's just I think that makes him kind of unique. Not unique because that stuff can happen all the time where the state will call people to the stand that really don't want to testify. But I think in this case, it's just interesting because of the contrast. Anyways, all right. So, same letter. Yes, the letter that I'm referring to here that I had that when, do you remember that it was in October of 94 that you told Detective Zoller that you had such a letter? If that's what it is, if that's what it was, yes. Okay. And do you recall that it was in October of 1994 that you discussed that letter with Detective Zoller and you also discussed your relationship with Lyle Menendez? Is that correct? If that's what the report says, sir. I'm not asking what the report said. I'm just asking you what your recollection is. Do you recall when you told Detective Zoller about the letter that you also told him about your relationship with Lyle Menendez? Did I tell Detective Zoller about my relationship with Lyle Menendez? Yes. Certainly, he was there asking about it. And you also told him about your relationship with Erik Menendez at that time, did you not? Of course. Now, did you have conversations with Erik Menendez concerning the scenario that is referred to in that letter at any time? Did I myself? Yes. No. Okay. Now, do you recall, did you tell Detective Zoller when he interviewed you in October of 1994 that during these visits with Erik and Lyle, they discussed what they thought that you could do to help with them with their case? Yes, naturally. So did they have those types of discussions? Well, it depends on what you mean by types. If you mean that nature, no. But however, being there and Erik being in jail and having his parents taken away, he was, offering and percolating up lots of suggestions and evidences, and what should I do? And I was used to it because it happened in my family, so I entertained these notions lightly and both at the same time earnestly. And did you tell Detective Zoller in October of 94 it was then discussed by the three of you that you would testify to a scenario where you had given Erik Menendez a handgun for protection? I don't believe that he had given one, but that he had came over and sought one, or something of the sort. I'd have to read the letter again to be sure. I'm not asking about the letter. What I'm asking you now, the letter is the complete end all of the nature of interaction with the Menendez brothers that the brothers had with myself, sir. So the question I'm asking you is this: did you tell Detective Zoller that it was discussed during your meeting with Erik and Lyle that you would testify to a scenario where you had given Erik a handgun for protection? Did I tell Detective Zoller that? Yes. Yes, I must have. And was that truthful? Well, it must have been misinterpreted as something other than it was. Were you truthful when you spoke to Detective Zoller? I always try to be truthful, sir. So, what was it that you told Detective Zoller that you now feel was misinterpreted? That exact context of the letter were discussed rather than a wide variety or a multiple possibility of things that could happen with the trial come around. You said that the exact contents or context of things were discussed that were not discussed. What are you referring to? I'm referring to specifics were not discussed. That letter, if you want to know the nature of it, you can ask and I'll tell you. It was a letter that Lyle had sent to me and Lyle thought it was a good idea. And I believe at the time he was not going to testify. So this is something that he used to alleviate that, I suppose. So did you tell Detective Zoller that it was discussed by you, Erik, and Lyle Menendez that you would testify to a scenario where you had given Erik Menendez a handgun for protection? Uh-huh, I have. I might have rightly or wrongly assumed that them being brothers, they had communicated back and forth between themselves. However, I can't be sure of that. I'm just asking you if you made that statement to Detective Zoller. That's right. Did you tell Detective Zoller in October of 94 that it was discussed by you and Erik and Lyle, that you would testify to a scenario where you had given Erik Menendez a handgun for protection? I don't know if I did, but however, if that is on the police report, if you recall during our meeting, our very unsuccessful meeting, I had told you that there was several inaccuracies of the police report that I had wished to correct and amend, and naturally, we didn't get around to that. Ms. Abramson says, I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last few words that the witness said, Your Honor. The court says we'll have the reporter read it back. Ms. Abramson says, I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last few words the witness said, Your Honor. Following answer was read back. Answer: I don't know if I did, but however, if that is on the police report, if you recall during our meeting, our very unsuccessful meeting, I had told you that there was several inaccuracies on the police report that I had wished to correct and amend, and naturally, we didn't get around to that. So he's telling on the stand, he's like, hey, I was telling you I wanted to correct the record, and you're like, nah, that's okay. Wow. So Mr. Khan says, in fact, at our meeting, didn't you take a look at their report and try to point out some inaccuracies? Did I? Yes. Well, we certainly tried to get around to that, but that did not seem to be what the priority, that did not seem to be the priority for yourself. It's like it wasn't a priority to you about the fact that there were some inaccuracies, so that's why we didn't like he's throwing this prosecutor under the bus and I'm living for it. All right, so that did not seem to be the priority for myself. Yes, we were in your office. Why is that? You tell me. I'm asking you why it did not seem to be my priority. I can't guess about that. I'm asking you why you reached the conclusion it did not seem to be my priority. Because it was your meeting in your office and we never got around to it. To doing what? To correcting the police report. Isn't it true that I handed you the police report and I told you point out the inaccuracies right now? I don't remember that, sir. You don't remember that. You don't remember having a discussion with us and looking at the report and finding no and not pointing out that there was any inaccuracies? Well, I remember that we never got around to the inaccuracies. Well, you were handed a report and you were asked to point out the inaccuracies. Is that correct? Miss Abramson says, I'm going to object since we weren't a party to any of this. We weren't invited to this particular 4-hour meeting. The court says, what's the objection? Ms. Abramson says, and we're only given these virtually illegible. Oh, I can't talk. And we were given these virtually ill illegible. I can't speak right now. Oh my God, my brain. Illegible notes, and I would object to this constant arguing with the witness when we can't even cross-examine on it. We don't know anything about it. The court says objection overruled, of course. Of course he does. I love good old biased Stanley Weisberg. Do you remember you were shown a copy of the report and you were asked to point out the inaccuracies? Is that correct? If you say so. It's not that I'm saying so. Mr. Eslaminia, you're the witness. You're the witness, Mr. Eslaminia. You can tell us what happened. Well, I tried, Mr. Khan. We tried to go around to the inaccuracies. I voiced that there were some, and that time you wanted to know exactly when and where they were and how they were. When I say we need to go through it, you said, well, we'll come around to that another time. We'll meet again and we'll sit down, and again, we never did. When I tried to go back to the police report, you waved it off, and you also told me that you can color any sort of scenario you want to the jury, so it doesn't matter what I say. Wow. Oh, wow. So he tried to go back to the police report. Classic brush somebody off move. Oh, we'll come back to that. We'll get back to it. But here, let's go back to this topic. And then when the person is like, no, let's come back to this, they wave it off. And then he tells them, I can color the details any way I want it. So the jury's not going to believe whatever you say, anyways. Wow. Um, I, I got no words. Mr. Khan tries to go around that, and he says, "Isn't it true that?" And Ms. Abramson says, "Could I have that answer read back, Your Honor? I couldn't hear it." No, no, no. She heard it. She wants to hear it again. Court says, okay, a portion of the answer was read back as follows, quote, well, I tried to go back to the police report, you waved it off, and you also told me that you can color any sort of scenario you want to the jury, so it doesn't matter what I say. That is pretty damaging. But of course, the judge isn't going to do anything, and nobody holds prosecutors or judges accountable anyways, so they get away with it, of course. Mr. Khan continues, I told you that I can color any scenario. Is that an exact quote? I don't know if color is, but that you could certainly formulate or make the jury see things your way is what you said. I'd say that was almost verbatim. You told us, okay, so he just skips over that. You told us, did you not, that you would not be a helpful witness in this case. Is that correct? I said that I had exhausted my hope and I could see no longer how I could be of any help. And you suggested and you implied that you would not tell the truth. Isn't that true? If you say so. I'm asking, are we talking about implication? I'm asking you. If that's what you took as an implication, that's fine. Isn't that the message that you were trying to communicate? I don't know if that's what I was trying to communicate. What I told you, Mr. Eslamania, was that Detective Zoller was present in the room, and no matter what you tried to do on the witness stand, Detective Zoller would be able to straighten it out after you testified. Uh-huh. Yeah, sure. You gotta try to get something on the record to correct that, don't you, buddy? Because otherwise you look like you've committed some misconduct there as your role as prosecutor. That's right. You told me Lies is the most honest guy. Oh, Les, sorry. I can't read. That's right. You told me Les is the most honest guy you've ever worked with. Les. Les. Leslie Zoller. Now, getting back to this statement, during the time that you were in my office, you never corrected the inaccuracy. You never corrected that area. Never said that that area was inaccurate, did you? We never pointed out any areas. Okay. But you were asked, we asked you to point out any accuracies, didn't we? I believe you did, yes. Now, getting back to the statement itself, you did. So we asked you to point out any accuracies, but we didn't give you a chance to point them out. So it's really on you. It's your fault, even though we didn't even give you a chance. So, and we designed it that way, so you couldn't give us any inaccuracies, so we couldn't fix it. Now, getting back to the statement itself, you did not tell Detective Zoller, I take it, that you had a conversation with Erik Menendez and Lyle Menendez in which you discussed a scenario where you had given Erik Menendez a handgun for protection. We're back on this. I did not tell Detective Zoller that. Did you ever tell Detective Zoller that? I don't think I ever told Detective Zoller about that scenario with a handgun in between myself, Erik, and Lyle at the time. No. I'm not saying at the time, or at the same time. Well, it varied times. Yes, did you tell Detective Zoller that you had conversations with Erik Menendez in which you had discussed with him a scenario in which you had given Erik Menendez a handgun for protection? I believe what I told Detective Zoller, who's a fine detective, by the way, that we have talked, we being the brothers and I, about the nature of what we could do, or I could do, or what would be done so, as far as the case goes, as far as strategies goes for the case, being virtuous or non-virtuous, nevertheless, they were discussed. However, the letter that I received from Lyle outlining clearly a scenario that was never specifically talked to was never talked to Erik between Erik and myself. However, I assumed Erik and Lyle talked about it, seeing how brothers in jail together. If I had told Detective Zoller that then he misunderstood what I was saying. So you did not make that statement to Detective Zoller as it is recorded in this police report. Is that correct? We were having lunch, and between bites, I might have said that, and it might have been misinterpreted by Mr. Zoller. I'm certainly not one to bring Detective Zoller's acumen or detective abilities into question. So, did you go on to tell Detective Zoller in that same October 1994 interview that this scenario was to have taken place before the defendant's parents' lives were taken? The scenario itself, I believe it's supposed to be before, yes. So you understand my question? Maybe not. The question is, did you tell Detective Zoller in that October 1994 interview, yes, that during your discussions with Erik and Lyle Menendez, they discussed with you a scenario which was supposed to have taken place prior to that time that their parents' lives were taken? No. You did not make that statement either. No. Okay. Did you tell Detective Zoller in October of 1994 that Erik Menendez and Lyle Menendez, in their discussions with you, emphasized that the gun was due to fear that they had of their parents? Is that, I'd have to see the letter again. I'm not talking about the letter. I'm the question. Oh, yes, yes. Mr. Zoller said, why the gun? And I believed, speculating back to the letter, that the letter was because of fear. I'm not talking about the letter for the umpteenth time, Mr. Eslamania. My question is this. In your October 1994 interview with Detective Zoller, yeah, Did you tell him that you had discussions with Erik and Lyle Menendez, and in these discussions, Erik and Lyle Menendez emphasized that the gun was due to fear that they had had of their parents? No, sir. So you did not make that statement either to Detective Zoller. Not that statement. No, sir. Did you tell Detective Zoller in your October 1994 conversation with him that following some discussions, you, Erik, and Lyle would add dynamics to fit what was needed for trial? That Erik, Lyle, and myself would add dynamics? Yes, would add dynamics to that scenario to fit what was needed for trial. That's a really weird way to say give false testimony. I don't see how that would be possible that all three would add dynamics. Did you tell Detective Zoller that you had conversations with Erik Menendez indicating that dynamics would be added to fit what was needed for the trial? I had lots of conversations with Erik. Do you understand the question that I asked you? Are you asking about that specific scenario and whether Erik and I discussed dynamics? That's what I'm asking. No. So you did not make any statement to Detective Zoller either, is that correct? Not that statement, no, sir. Okay, and did you tell Detective Zoller that you had conversations with Lyle indicating that you would add dynamics to the scenario to fit what was needed for trial? I'm not sure if I said that. I'm not sure if we added dynamics. However, at one point, I believe the gun thing, because all I had was a replica gun that had never been used. It was gold plated in 1868. That came into question, but that was between Lyle and myself. As far as adding dynamics or subtracting dynamics, no. I don't even know what that means, adding dynamics. So you never made that statement to Detective Zoller in what you're saying, is that correct? No. Isn't it true, Mr. Eslaminia, that you in fact spoke to Detective Zoller at length about the fact that you had had visits with both Erik and Lyle, in which this scenario that is outlined in the letter was discussed? First, I question at length because it was over a 45-minute lunch between my school breaks. And secondly, once again, no, because the contents of the letter were between Lyle Menendez and myself. Uh-huh. And do you recall that sometime after the police report was written, Detective Zoller wanted to make sure that he had written the report accurately? Uh-huh. And Ms. Abramson says, I'm going to object to the form of the question, Your Honor. Counsel is leading the witness all the way. The court says I'm going to permit him, as I have, to lead the witness based on the nature of the witness's attitude and responses. Ms. Abramson says, with respect to what Detective Zoller's intentions were, the court says that's a separate question. It has nothing to do with leading. It assumes the witness would be able to understand and speculate as to what Detective Zoller wanted. Mr. Khan says, do you recall that sometime after he interviewed you, that is, Detective Zoller interviewed you in October, the court says, hold on one second, let's leave them out there. We're going to take our recess, and during the recess, we'll let the jury come in, but we'll close the courtroom and take a recess until 10 minutes to the hour. Abramson says, thank you, Your Honor. Let's clear the courtroom, please. The bailiff says, you want the courtroom cleared, Your Honor? Yes, that's what I just said. Wait, wait, wait. You may step down. Wait in the hallway. Mr. Eslaminia exited the courtroom. All right. So the following proceedings were held in open court outside the presence of the jury. The court says, we're back from recess. We have everybody present. Get the witness back up on the witness stand, please. You may continue your direct. Mr. Khan says, thank you. Mr. Eslaminia, did you also tell Detective Zoller during the October 1994 interview that he had with you that as the trial was nearing, Erik and Lyle asked you not to come to jail for visits, as the visits would look suspicious with you testifying in their behalf? I believe it's because I was no longer going to testify that they did not want me coming, and so yes, it would thus look suspicious. You are not going to be a witness, you're saying? No. Why would that look suspicious? Well, because Lyle decided that it would no longer be his idea or his benefit or his want for me to go through this scenario. And they wanted, because of, I suppose, this, I can't guess as to their intentions, but I would say because they did not want someone visiting them that prior they had entanglements with. That's total speculation. Mr. Gessler says, I didn't hear the last part of the answer. The court says, are you sure that they are not strategically replaced? That Are you sure these are not strategically replaced lack of hearing or just? Mr. Gessler says, no, it wasn't. Ms. Amerson says, just getting old, Judge. The court says, we'll have the last portion read back. The answer was read back as follows. Quote, answer. Well, because Lyle decided that it would no longer be his idea or his benefit or his want for me to go through this scenario, and they wanted, because of, I suppose, this, I can't guess as to their intentions, but I would say because they did not want someone visiting them that prior they had entanglements with. Mr. Khan says, are you saying that at some point you had conversations with Erik or Lyle Menendez in which it was discussed that you would not be a witness in this case? Yes. And can you tell us when that discussion took place? I cannot, sir. I apologize, but it would be sometime in between receiving the letter and the first trial. I think, if I'm not mistaken, there was an attorney working for Lyle at the time whose advice lacked pro- probity. Um, and he was no longer with Lyle. And Lyle decided to testify himself, and he was going to get on the stand. But as to the exact date, I don't know. I was in midterms myself, so I'd have to say it was either in December or January or April or May. So are you saying that it was understood that finals, I'm sorry, not midterms. So are you saying it was understood that you were no longer going to be a witness because someone told you that you would not be called as a witness? Yes. And who told you that? I believe it was Lyle, and there might have been a third party on the phone. He spared me the collect charges most of the time. So, over the telephone, Lyle Menendez told you that he would not be calling you as a witness. Is that correct? He decided that the truth was the route that he was going to take. Yes. And there was a third party on the phone at the time that he made that statement to you? I believe so, yes, sir. And who was that third party? I'd have to guess either it was their answering service that they had employed, or it might have been the elder Mrs. Menendez. Who? The grandmother, Your Honor. Mr. Khan continues, and how did you know that there was a third party on the phone? One, the call wasn't collect, and two, I believe there was an exchange of some sort. If it was Mrs. Menendez, Grandma Menendez, he would naturally say hello, and then she would leave the conversation to Lyle and myself. If the call was routed through their answering service, then it would just be Lyle and myself and no collect charge. Well, on this occasion, did you hear a voice on the telephone besides the voice of Lyle Menendez? Oh, I can't say for sure. I just know that there was no collect charge, so either it was through their service or someone else. And when it was through their service, do you know whether someone from their service remained on the line? That's a good question. I have no idea. So you don't know for sure whether or not there was a third person on the line? Not for sure. Okay, so you had this conversation with Lyle Menendez. Was that before the start of the trial? Yes, definitely. And did you ask him why he no longer wanted you to be a witness? Well, they decided just to nix 86, the stratagem that was written in the letter. Is that something that Lyle Menendez told you? It is. And did you ask him why he was nixing it so late in the game? Ms. Abrams says, I was going to object to the form of the question. He said December, January, April, May. He didn't say what year. We don't know if it's late in the game. The court says, why don't you clarify? Mr. Khan says, now, before the start of the trial, when did the trial start? To the best of your recollection, if you can reference to a month or reference it to what you believed the start of the trial to be. No, I can't remember that well because it was quite some time in the last 2 years, 3 years in the past. As far as where it was in relation to the beginning of the trial, one, I have no idea when the trial started, so therefore I couldn't even hazard a guess. Okay, okay. And did you ask him, strike that, so did you, at some point, Eric and Lyle Menendez ask you not to come to jail for visits because the visits would look suspicious? Ms. Abramson says, object to the form of the question as compound, Your Honor. The court says, he, referring to statements attributed to him in the report. Ms. Abramson says, I understand that, but I think now he's asking him the real question. The court says, objection overruled. Witness says, one more time, Mr. Khan. Mr. Khan says, yes. Did you tell Detective Zoller that Eric and Lyle Menendez asked you not to come to jail for visits, as visits would look suspicious? Uh-huh. I can't say exactly who it was that said those words and had that thought. However, myself, when referring to either Eric or Lyle, referred to them as Eric and Lyle. Whether their actions would be separate or individual, I I group them in reference to them. So did you make a statement to Detective Zoller? I think I did, sir. I saw it in the police report, yes. And was it true when you made that statement? Was what true? That Eric and Lyle asked you not to come to the jail. Oh, yes, sir. For visits. Yes, I believe it was true, and it is true. Uh-huh. And did they tell you why they did not want you to come to jail for visits? I believe it was because Ms. Abramson did not want it, or because yourself would subpoena the records and the less visitors they had maybe was better. I'm not sure. Regardless, my brother did not want me to visit them either because of his case and things like that. So, nevertheless, I just didn't visit. So, it wasn't because of what this prosecutor's saying. Okay. Um, During the time that Eric and Lyle Menendez asked you not to come to the jail for visits, was that prior to the time that you understood you were not going to be a witness or after the time that you understood that you were not going to be a witness? If I'm not mistaken, I believe it was at the same time. And what do you mean at that time? At the time that Lyle told me that, listen, let's forget about the other thing that we were going to do, and it would help if you didn't come anymore. If you didn't come by anymore, just didn't look good. And did he say, I feel like this is, I definitely feel like there's some lies in here, and I think some of this might be made up, but I can't be sure. And did he say why it wouldn't look good if you're not going to be a witness? No, it's his life, so I just took his word for it. Uh-huh. Didn't ask. And did Eric and Lyle Menendez say to you that their contact with you thereafter was going to be through Beatrice? No. They did not say that to you? No. Up until that time, I believe I had to have been through Beatrice or via somebody else, only on certain occasions. Naturally, when I visited them directly, it wasn't through anybody. Did you tell Detective Zoller in your October 1994 interview that you were told that your contact with them was to be through Beatrice? Yes. Did you say that to Detective Zoller? I believe Detective Zoller was asking me, who did you go who was the person that acted in between, was the intermediary, and I said Beatrice was one of them. Mama was, naturally, another one, and sometimes they'd call me with another friend or someone else would have a message, something of that sort. So did you tell Detective Zoller that when the defendants told you that you were not to come to the jail because your visits might look suspicious, that it was also said at that time that your contact with the defendants was to be through Beatrice? I don't think so. No. So you did not say that to Detective Zoller. I thought you were asking me whether, in fact, it was true. As far as whether I said it to Detective Zoller, I'm not sure what I said exactly when it comes to going through Beatrice. Again, it was over lunch and over the span of an hour, so we were eating. So you do not recall saying this to Detective Zoller, is that what you're saying? Would you repeat that again? Yes. Did you tell Detective Zoller that after the defendants told you not to come to the jail for visits because it would look suspicious, that it was also said that your contact, oh, yes, sir, would be through Beatrice? What I had meant when I was talking about that was Lyle had said because of this letter, because of the felonious nature of it, naturally we'd keep contact through Beatrice. Before that time, when we no longer had that sort of involvement, then I don't think that any person was needed. So Lyle Menendez told you that once he sent you this letter? Yes. That thereafter your contact should be through Beatrice. I believe so. I think that's what it says in that letter. And did he say something? Are you referring to the conversation that is in the letter, or are you referring to a conversation outside of the letter? Both. But I believe it is in the letter as well. Okay, as far as the conversation that is outside of the letter, you said it is because of the felonious nature of the letter? Yes, that he made such statements to you and our prior involvement. I believe Lyle said, well, because of that thing, and we're not going to go through with it, it might not look so good if we're talking all the time. Plus, he had a trial coming up, so. Well, when he sent you this letter, yes, sir, that was not the same time that he was telling you that he was that he was not going to go through with the false scenario, was it? No, the letter was much later. So how long after you received this letter did he tell you that we're not going to go along with it with this false scenario? I guess 7, 8, 9 months, something like that. Uh-huh. And you also said it was between 7 and 10 months after you received the letter that you learned that the defendants were truly guilty of this, had truly taken their parents' lives. Is that correct? I believe it was around the same time. Yes. Although I don't know exactly when it was, I was quite shocked, actually, myself. Uh-huh. Quite shocked. Now, after you had the conversations with Detective Zoller in October of 94, you had another conversation with Detective Zoller in February of 95. Is that correct? Possibly. And do you recall that sometime thereafter Detective Zoller spoke to you on the telephone and read you the entire report verbatim to see if there were any inaccuracies in that report? I don't believe it was to see if there were any inaccuracies. It was a call in the morning. Les generally caught me in the morning and read it to me over the phone and said, how does that sound? Does that sound all right to you? And I said, whatever you say, Les. Uh-huh. So was Detective Zoller asking you if the report was accurate? Yes. He was asking me if that sounds all right to me, not whether it was accurate, because I don't have it in front of me. He was sort of reading it once over the phone in the morning. Uh-huh. And he told you as he read that to you, yes, you understood that what he was saying, that you had told him these specific statements. Is that true? His interpretation of my statements on a police report, yes. Well, when he read that to you, did he read to you that during these visits with Erik and Lyle, they discussed that Erik and Lyle, thought you could do to help them? Did they discuss what they thought you could do to help them? I don't know. Here is a quote. It was then discussed by the three of them that Amir would testify to a scenario where he had given Erik a handgun for protection. This was to take place before their parents' lives were taken. Erik and Lyle emphasized that the gun was due to fear that they had of their parents. Amir said that as time went on, the three of them Erik and Lyle and myself would add dynamics to fit what was needed for the court trial. Do you recall Detective Zoller reading that to you? I don't recall it now, but he must have read it to me because he said he read it. I remember, however, something of the gist of the letter that I didn't agree with, and he changed it right there quickly on the computer, and he said, "Okay, it was no problem. Just wanted to get the last minute read," as he corrected that thing that I had said, although I don't recall what that was. Uh-huh. And did you understand when Detective Zoller was reading this letter to you that he was attributing specific statements to you and that he was checking for accuracy to see if this was an accurate report? I mean, duh. Yes, I would have appreciated if I would have gotten a copy of this before it became an official police record, that I could have clarified any inconsistencies or inaccuracies that were in the record. Again, it was just read to me over the phone. Okay, so aside from the fact that you did not get a copy of this report, did you realize that when Detective Zoller was reading this report to you, that he was attributing specific statements to you and he was trying to ascertain if these were accurate statements made by you? Yes, I believe that that was his intention, although you'd have to ask him you'd have to ask him, however, myself, I was not cognizant of this because becoming official and therefore me correcting any nuances that I felt like later I'd have to answer for. So you didn't think that was going to be an official report provided to the prosecutors and defense attorneys? Well, the way I understood it, Les understood my involvement with Lyle to be this letter, and me rendering this letter to them was the end of it. So for me, I had written the matter off, and so another phone call from Detective Zoller reading me something over the phone, wrongly, I could see that now, was not imperative for me. And at the time that he read this report to you, did you realize at that time that he was reading it wrongly, as you are now alleging? Again, there was something that I didn't like on there, and I told him about it, and I thought maybe he said he'd send me a copy, see what I think, but I remember that maybe he was in a rush. He wanted to turn it in by the afternoon, something of the such. Aside from that one area in which you asked for a correction and a correction was made, did you feel that the remainder of the report was accurate? I was uneasy with it. Why were you uneasy with it? Again, because a police report, there was a lot. I mean, I feel like both yourself and Detective Zoller know a lot of what's going on, and when you try to hear something someone else is saying, you put into whatever else is going on yourself, and the other person, it just doesn't jibe. For you it does, and so, I felt the same thing happened with Detective Zoller, and so naturally, being a police report, I didn't really like the way it sounds. It summed a conversation that we had and our interaction over a several month period in 2, 3 paragraphs. But, what are you going to do? Do you feel that the report was accurate, other than that one area where you suggested that a change should be made? I thought that it was a good abridgment of the things that went on. As far as exact accuracies, no, sir, I did not even think about that. So did you point out any additional changes made any changes to make the report more accurate? I didn't have a copy in front of me. So based on what you were hearing over the telephone. Oh, yes, based upon the phone conversation, I thought it was just fine. Meaning accurate? Meaning not accurate? No. What do you mean by fine? What do you mean by accurate? I'm asking what you mean by fine. I mean, it was okay. It had to do. It was a police report. I can't sit there and go through every letter with him. So, accurate enough in what you mean by fine. Yes, sir. I should have been more diligent. And at that time, did you realize that you should have been more diligent? At that time, no, I was late for school at the time. And at any time thereafter, did you ever point out to Detective Zoller that there were any inaccuracies in this report which needed to be cleaned? Yes, several times. When was that? One time was at the meeting with yourself. Another time he subpoenaed me again. If you remember, I got subpoenaed for the 16th, and then you decided to make it the 10th and wrote the 10th over the 16th. Then Les came back in and said, maybe the 14th. So, and I said, I can't. I have a test that day. He said, okay, we'll make it the 16th. At that time, I said, well, what happened? We were going to sit down. I thought we were going to go over the police report, and Mr. Khan said, we wanted to talk to you. He goes, well, we'll call you. That was a very long story. And when did you first become aware, after your October 27th, 1995 interview with Detective Zoller, that there were inaccuracies in the report which should be corrected? When I took time to read it. I'm sorry? When I took time to read it. And how did you get a copy of the report? I don't recall. I believe I was in your office. Are you saying that when you were in my office, that was the first time that you had ever had the opportunity to read the report? No, no, sir. I got another report from Ms. Abramson. And when did you get that report from Ms. Abramson? I don't remember, sir. And how long before the interview in my office did you get that report? I don't recall. I don't recall if it was before. Oh, yes, it must have been, yes. And yes. Do you know how long before? No, I don't. I'd guess 2 months, maybe in between 2 months. And do you recall reading it the day before you came to my office? No, I remember reading it at your office and sometime after. If you look at it, there's inconsistencies without the page itself, within the page itself, the time difference. As I figured, you just purposely want it vague so later you can use whatever angle you'd like. You think what's vague? The police report. Do you think Detective Zoller intentionally created a vague report to fill in inaccuracies? I don't know. That's why I was adamant about correcting these times. If you like, we can go through the police report now and I can bring to light those inaccuracies both on the police report and in actuality. Like he still hasn't even had the opportunity to tell what the inaccuracies are. Next question is, during the time, so he just ignores that. During the time that you were in my office, did you point out any inaccuracies? I mentioned some. Ms. Abramson said this has been asked and answered, Your Honor, overruled. I mentioned several, yes. Which ones did you mention? I don't remember at this time. And do you recall being asked by myself during the time that you were in my office whether you had had discussions with Erik and Lyle Menendez about the scenario that is referred to in the letter? No, I don't. You don't recall being asked that by myself? I have no recollection of it. And at no time did you say, while you were in my office, that you had never had such discussions with Erik and Lyle Menendez, did you? I don't recall that either. Ms. Abramson says, excuse me, Your Honor, does the court have the notes of July 14th? Court says, those were the most recent ones? Ms. Abramson says, yes, about this one that Mr. Khan, and then the court says, no, as I said before, I didn't have them, and I asked you if you wanted me to have them. Ms. Abramson says, I'm going to give you a set. Mr. Khan says, I have no further questions at this time, Your Honor. The court says, okay, cross-examination. Ms. Abramson says, shall I come up to the bench? The court says, just give it to the clerk. Okay. Cross by Ms. Abramson of Mr. Eslaminia. As a reminder, the jury is not here. So this is outside the presence of the jury. Mr. Eslaminia, do you have a copy of the police report with you now? No, ma'am. I don't with me now. When you were first interviewed by Detective Zoller on October 12th, 1994, where were you living? I believe I was living in the peninsula of North California, near San Francisco, San Mateo County to be exact. When you had that interview with Detective Zoller, did it take place up where near you, where you were living? Yes, in a restaurant. And were you going to school there? I was. And did you call and make an appointment with, did he call and make an appointment with you before you met with him for that lunch? He did. And do you recall what month it was that he first contacted you? No, I have no recollection of that. If the report said September of 1994 within the month before he met with you, does that seem right or is that inaccurate? I don't see why it would be wrong. Now, was there some reason that you met him at a restaurant rather than at your home? No reason. It was my lunch break. Maybe it was rather selfish reason, and I thought I'd get my lunch and get that out of the way as well. That's all. And on that date, during that interview, did you give Detective Zoller anything? I believe the letter. The whole letter? No, no, it was one page. And you had that with you? I did. At lunch. Yes, I believe so, yes. And at that time, did you have outstanding warrants for your arrest? I sure did. And before you told Detective Zoller about anything about those contacts that you had with Erik and Lyle Menendez, and before you gave him any part of the letter, did you tell him that you wanted him to help you with the warrants that you had? Yes, I did. And did he respond to that? He asked why. I said, naturally, I'm going to be coming down there and this and that, and can't you just punch in something and get rid of my traffic warrants? He said, well, we'll see what we can do. Ay, ay, ay. So he has selfish reasons here that he's trying to get something out of his, testimony slash statement by by talking to Zoller. He wants his traffic warrants taken care of. And Detective Zoller says he's going to see what he can do. Okay. So you had more than traffic warrants. You had a warrant for a petty theft case, didn't you? Yes. Something you could actually get arrested for. There were mainly traffic ones, but they were warrants, meaning I have to come in and show the judge that I did my time and this and that. Did Detective Zoller ever tell you that he tried to get a dismissal of the petty theft case? Yes. He said that I would just have to show up in court and they could take care of it that way. They being who? I assumed the district attorney's office and Mr. Zoller, but I'm not sure about that. And they would be doing that as a favor to you, isn't that right? So he's receiving a favor for his testimony, basically. I believe that's under what it would be. However, later I said no. But at this point, it was because you were going to do something for them in the hopes that they would do something for you, right? At this point, it would be colored that way, yes. At least he's honest. I mean, he does not come off as likable whatsoever, but he's honest. I mean, he's not like he's a bad witness. He's a very bad witness. And it comes off. But at least he's honest. At least if you ask him a straightforward question, he'll give you a straightforward answer, or so it seems. I don't know if he's honest, but it seems like, some of these answers he's not going to be that straightforward on unless he really means it. Um, and what you proceeded to do for them was to tell them a story about visits with Erik and Lyle Menendez and things that were discussed, correct? A story? I wouldn't say a story. I'm not saying a true or untrue story at this point, simply an account, if you will. He would ask questions and I would try to answer them, yes. Well, he asked you for background leading up to you being in on, well, first of all, let me ask you this. You're aware that in this report of Detective Zoller's, he indicates that on October 12th, 1994, I met with Amir Eslaminia. The first thing that Amir said was that he had a letter that could be very beneficial for the prosecution's case against Erik and Lyle Menendez. Yes. Is that true? Is that the first thing you said? I doubt it's the first thing I said. Well, was it or wasn't it? I'd have to say no. So, what part of the report is inaccurate? Yes. Did you tell Detective Zoller on October 12th that you and your girlfriend had warrants for your arrest and that you would assist Detective Zoller when and if those warrants disappeared? I don't think it was so much of when and if in absolute terms. Naturally, if I'd engaged with him, it was too late to withdraw, but I said, "See what you can do about these warrants, and my girlfriend's got traffic tickets. See what you can do about hers." What's the status of the warrants now? They're all taken care of. And then you said Detective Zoller asked you questions, so his warrants are thrown out. They're all taken care of. So, w- mission accomplished. He got what he needed. So now he's up in the stand testifying for them. And then you said Detective Zeller asked you questions about your relationship with Eric and Lyle? Yes. Did he ask you specifically if you ever saw them at jail? I believe if he didn't ask, I certainly told him. And you told him, did you not, that when you went to visit them in jail, you'd do it without ever filling out a visiting slip? No, not ever. But there was times that I went, and if there was someone else visiting, then they would wait in the line and fill out a visiting slip, and I myself would wait elsewhere and get some chips and juice or something. Well, you don't get to visit unless you fill out a visiting slip, do you, Mr. Eslamania? Yes, you do. So he's just breaking rules left and right all over the place. So you can just walk right in there? I believe the way it works is that someone goes up and then says there's two people visiting, and then they give two slips, but somebody else goes up. And you don't ever have to identify yourself when you go in there if someone else is with you. Is that what you're saying? Not always. So you could be a convicted felon and they would just let you in if you were with someone's grandmother. Is that what you're saying? Maybe. I don't know if I said convicted felon, but I know I got in there without filling out the visiting slips sometimes. Hey. So if the report from Detective Zoller reads, when Eric and Lyle were arrested, he would go visit them in county jail without filling out a visitor slip. Is that accurate, inaccurate, or partly accurate? I would say it's accurate. And if the report reads, he said that meaning you, he would accomplish this by going with somebody else. The other people would fill out the visitor slip, and they, the sheriff's deputies, would only ask him for his name and let him go in with the other person. Is that what you told Detective Zoller? Yes. And are you telling us that that's true? That you could just go in there without ever filling out a visitor slip? I don't know how it is now, but I know that's what happened with me several times. Well, isn't it true, Mr. Eslamania, that you said that Detective Zoller because you knew there weren't any visiting slips with your name on it? I believe there might be some visiting slips with my name on it, but not very many. But not very many. I don't see. And you were trying to convince him at that time that you had many visits with Eric and Lyle Menendez, weren't you? I wouldn't say I was trying to convince him, Mrs. Abramson. I was just telling him that I had visits with him. Now, when you were next contacted by Detective Zoller on February 27th, 1994, you were still living in Northern California? Yes. And do you recall, by the way, in reading this, the police report covers three different dates of contacts with you, does it not? I believe so. I thought maybe only two dates, but, well, let me show you. I'm holding a three-page document that I would prefer to mark a clean copy of at some point, Your Honor, if necessary, which means Beverly Hills Police Department supplemental report. And just as you uh, or I'm just asking you to take a look over whether that appears to be the police report that you and Mr. Khan have been talking about. Yes, it is. So there's three dates, you said. Well, we'll get to that. Let's look at the report. Yes, you notice this report contains the contents of a purported contents of a conversation on October 12th, 1994. I see that, yes. Do you see it also references the date on February 27th, 1995? I believe that was a tentative date. Well, you see, it says on February 27th, 1995, I called Amir to see whether it would be convenient for him to come to Los Angeles to clear up his warrants. Oh, yes, yes. And to give us the 7-page letter. Yes, it was a phone contact. Right. Now, that phone contact was the phone contact that Mr. Khan had been asking you about, where Detective Zoller read you the report and asked you for corrections, and you made a correction? No, no, that's a different phone call. So there was a different contact that's not in the report at all. Yes. So the report is faulty and inaccurate. Is this the report? The third date in this report in is April 4th, 1995, the day the warrant was served. Yes. That was a search warrant for the letter? Yes, again on the warrant. And that's when Detective Zoller took the letter? Yes. The court says, how much longer do you think you'll be? Ms. Abramson says, longer than 5 o'clock, Your Honor. The court says, okay, well, we'll resume. What time counsel want to resume on the hearing and when? We have other witnesses tomorrow morning at 8:30. So this is going to be continued, this hearing. Ms. Abramson says, sure. The court says, I said we have other witnesses tomorrow morning. Ms. Abramson says, how about tomorrow afternoon? Is that the court says, I have court. Or the witness says, I have court. The court says, I want to work out the schedule of other witnesses here. What do you have? Let's figure out who we have. And then the witness says, Your Honor, I also have another. The court says, wait a minute, just be quiet. You shut him up. It says, wait a minute, just be quiet. The witness says, I have another court hearing myself. Just be quiet. Yes, I apologize. Basically, here comes Ms. Nahara saying, basically, Your Honor, everyone is on call. It depends on whatever the court wants us to schedule. We can have as many or as few as you want. The court says, well, I'd like to fill up the morning at least tomorrow. So actually, um, let's see. I don't know when his hearing is continued, but right now, so the next witness we're going to have is Mark Heffernan, who's a tennis coach. And I didn't do a poll, or no, I did do a poll for him, and you guys did want to hear from him. So we will go over his testimony in its entirety. What else was I gonna say? I don't know. I think that was it. All right. So he says we can have as many or as few. The court says, well, I'd like to fill up the morning at least tomorrow. Ms. Nahara says, okay. The court says, if all day we can have this witness come back on Wednesday afternoon to finish this hearing. Right now, we know we're not going to be in session Wednesday afternoon. If we have another witness tomorrow and Wednesday morning, is that feasible? Ms. Nahara says, yes. Mr. Khan says, yes, perhaps. We'll call Valerie Hart, Larry Cohen, Mark Heffernan, Valerie Hart. We can't call Mr. Cohen, but we can call Hart and Heffernan. And Hart is the real estate agent, but she is not called until Wednesday. There's an Amanda Greer who is the So for the Tuesday of this week, we've got Mark Heffernan and Amanda Greer testifying. So that is what eventually happens. Ms. Aronson says, counsel, who did you say after Guthrie and, oh, you mean Dula? Who was the last one? The court says Angel. Ms. Aronson says, can't we do this all tomorrow? Mr. Levin says, Angel, they indicated would be next week. The court says, okay, well, we'll see if we can do this tomorrow and Wednesday morning. And the witness will be ordered to return Wednesday afternoon so we can commence at 1:30. The witness says, myself, Wednesday afternoon, Wednesday at 1:30. What's the 25th? The courtroom at 1:30. Okay, we'll be in recess until tomorrow at 8:30, and if we can do the hearing relating to Detective Zoller and Ms. Maher, we can do that perhaps tomorrow at 8 if you're ready to discuss. And the court is adjourned. And that is it for this episode. So, thank you guys so much for joining me, for watching. What did you think? I don't remember Ms. Maher testifying. I don't know if maybe it wasn't in the, maybe we didn't go over it. I can't remember now, but unfortunately, I don't remember, but fortunately, we got to listen to her testimony this time around, and we got to hear a little bit of the Amir Eslaminia hearing outside the presence of the jury and see what kind of a witness he's going to be when he finally does come in front of the jury. Get a little taste of his attitude and whatnot. So I think that's going to be an interesting witness. But up first, or up next, I should say, will be Mark Heffernan. So make sure you are subscribed and you got the notifications on for that. We will get to that on Thursday. So, or no, Friday. Sorry, Friday. I guess I've officially switched to Fridays. It does help me because when I have other cases and stuff, especially Karen Reed right now that I'm working on, it gives me a little more time to put together our full video for Fridays instead of Thursdays. So it's a lot more um, painstaking to to read through a testimony than it is to watch video. So um, we will do the best I can, and we will try to get through it. So let me know what you guys think of this day's session, and I will see you guys in the next one. Take care. Bye now.